A new world came into existence, the Abyss. As time passed, it filled with all kinds of living beings, but survival came at a cost. War and bloodshed became a way of life. People fought monsters and each other, striking from the shadows if necessary. The only rule was to survive, and for those who did, great treasures awaited. In a certain era, a brutal war raged. A mighty dragon lay defeated on the battlefield, its massive body motionless. Nearby, a man knelt on the ground, coughing up blood. Before he could recover, another dragon emerged from the shadows, its claws gripping him tightly. The crushing force made him spit blood again. Then, as if dismissing him, the dragon let go, leaving him to die. Gritting his teeth, the man whispered that these creatures lacked intelligence, sealing their own fate. Just then, a glowing sphere appeared in the dragon's mouth. He closed his eyes, thinking about the others, wondering if they had survived. At that moment, a radiant golden light flared. A hand clad in golden armor reached out, and a woman in gleaming battle gear stepped forward. "The last death squad has been wiped out," she declared. Turning to her remaining allies, she stated grimly, "That leaves just the four of us. The last hope of humanity." Keldien shut his eyes in silent resignation. Kang Tai crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. A short distance away, a lone figure sat in deep thought, his eyes closed. The weight of their survival, and the future of humanity, rested heavily on his mind. His name was Hansu. Before them, the space-time crystal Okenial began to spin. A great, mystical sphere, it held the power to turn back time. Humanity's final chance after 50 years of despair in the abyss. Kang Tai straightened up, his voice steady. "Only one person can return to the past," he said, though in his mind, the answer was obvious. Kang Tai smirked, rubbing his chin. "Well, clearly, it has to be the strongest among us," he mused. Keldien adjusted his glasses with a sigh. "For once, I thought Kang Tai would say something useful," he muttered. "I regret wasting even a second expecting anything different." Air stepped between them, her voice firm. "Enough. Focus. Most of the Valkyries sent to fight the Golden Dragon have fallen. It's only a matter of time before it reaches us." She lowered her weapon, hesitating for a moment. It felt unfair, but they had no other choice. She turned her gaze forward, conviction in her eyes. "The only one who can return to the past is Hansu." Hansu looked up at her, his heart pounding. He hesitated, staring at his own hands. Hansu remained silent, lost in thought. He had been fighting for too long. Day after day, year after year, his hands were drenched in blood. Yet he could barely remember why he kept going. Maybe dying like this would not be so bad. Aes placed her hand over his, cutting off his thoughts. She sat beside him, her voice steady. "The fate of humanity rests in your hands. Don't give up, Hansu." He looked at her tiredly, then glanced at Keldien and Kang Tai. Keldien nodded. "Aes is right. The fact that you're still here, even though you started 20 years later than Yin, proves why you're the right choice. If you had begun just 5 years earlier, things might have turned out differently." Kang Tai grinned. "They've got a point. Even I have to admit your skills are undeniable. But hey, if you really don't want to go, just say so." His grin widened as he added, "Think about it. Going back means getting everything you missed out on." Then, realizing how that sounded, he quickly corrected himself. I mean, you would be the one getting them, obviously, since you're the only one who can go back." Hansa let out a faint chuckle. Then, finally, he stood up. He walked toward the massive, glowing sphere. The moment he stepped closer, an overwhelming pressure crashed down on him. The others tensed. A shadow loomed over them from a nearby crevice. The dragon had arrived. Darkin's roar tore through the battlefield, shaking the ground. Golden flames burst from its mouth. Keldien shouted, "Hansu, stay focused. We'll hold it off." He raised his hands, summoning a powerful shield that shimmered above the party. The moment the flames struck, an explosion erupted, forcing everyone to brace themselves. "Switch," Keldien commanded. Aes and Kang Tai moved instantly. "Hold the dragon while I prepare." Kang Tai gripped his stone, his expression resolute. "Leave it to us." He shot a glance at Hansu. "Now's your chance. Show us what you can do." Aes didn't wait. She charged forward first. Kang Tai followed close behind. Dragons descended upon them from all sides. Aes drove her weapon into the ground, sending powerful shockwaves outward. "Kang Tai, now," she shouted. His weapon ignited in a blazing inferno. Flames surged around him as he raised his sword. "I figured this out a long time ago." With a powerful swing, he struck the earth, causing it to crack and tremble. Then, his eyes widened in shock. A dragon's claw came down hard. He barely had time to react, gritting his teeth as he braced for impact. Hansu instinctively moved to help, but Keldien grabbed his arm. "Your weapon is broken," he reminded him. "Don't let yourself get distracted." Aes turned to him. "Keldien's right. You have to go." She took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "I know you think we're annoying, but that's not a reason to turn your back on us now." She turned away, gripping her weapon tighter. For once, Just listen to me. Hansa smirked. I'll try my best, he said. Air smiled. Even in a moment like this, he hadn't changed. She turned, leaving the rest to Keldian. Adjusting his glasses, Keldian called out, Hansu. His voice was steady. Listen carefully. Hansa turned toward him as magic began to swirl around him. As Air said, there's no need for pointless killing, Keldian continued. But don't hesitate to cut down the parasites who threaten humanity. Save only those who deserve to live. His gaze darkened. And whatever you do, don't forget about the Berserker King, Clementine Keen. That bastard needs to die. Keldian's eyes locked onto his. Do you understand? Hansa gave a firm nod. Keldian smiled. Good. Now, get ready. The massive sphere began to spin, faster and faster. Hansa took a deep breath, his expression resolute. The others turned toward him, watching as the sphere activated. Keldian clapped his hands together, summoning layers of protective spells that formed a barrier between them and the dragon. White lightning crackled across the space. Then, everything changed. In an instant, Hansu was surrounded by a massive crowd. Confused voices filled the air as people frantically looked around, trying to understand where they were. A green sun hung in the sky, casting light over the crumbling remains of a city. It had worked. Determination settled in Hansu's heart. He had to give this everything he had. He couldn't let his comrades down. All around him, panic spread. Where are we? Someone shouted. I want to go back, a girl screamed. A man grabbed another by the collar. You did this, didn't you? I don't know anything, the other man protested. Let go of me. Hansu watched the chaos unfold. Of course, people were terrified. They had just been thrown into another world. His mind flashed back to the year he was born, the year everything began. It had started with just 100 people. But soon, the numbers surged out of control. Countless people vanished without a trace, swallowed by the abyss. He remembered his own disappearance at 20. One moment, he was holding his phone. The next, it slipped from his grasp as he was pulled into another dimension. This world was the midpoint of the abyss, where countless dimensions converged. Those who arrived first gained skills instantly, driven by raw survival instinct. But this place was nothing short of a nightmare. A lawless, merciless world where monsters ruled. And when enough people from a swallowed world gathered here, the door to the abyss would open. And then, the Great War would begin. Stretching his arms, Hansu exhaled. 5 years. That's all I've got to get strong. He took his first step forward. Then he paused, glancing down at his hands. His strength, his skills, everything he had built up in the past, was gone. He clenched his fists. No matter what, he had to push forward. A sudden scream shattered the air. People gasped in terror, pointing toward the sky. It was splitting apart. A crack widened in the heavens, and something began to emerge. Then, it fell. With a guttural howl, a monstrous imp crashed into the crowd. The people around it froze in shock. The imp let out a rough cough, then straightened itself. Its glowing eyes swept over the crowd. And then, it grinned. The imp-like creature grinned, baring sharp teeth. Greetings, everyone. I am your fairy assistant. The crowd remained frozen, listening as the so-called assistant continued. I'm here to give you a short briefing. His eerie smile widened. So, listen carefully. Hansa folded his arms, watching with a cold expression. A briefing? He scoffed internally. This was not an explanation. It was nothing more than a twisted way to push people into killing each other. Welcome to another world, the fairy assistant declared cheerfully. From this moment on, you've been granted an amazing opportunity. Enough nonsense. A man in the crowd suddenly shouted, pointing at the creature. What do you mean another world? Just send us back home. The fairy assistant's friendly demeanor vanished in an instant. His voice turned sharp. Wait until I'm finished, he snapped. The man hesitated. The sudden shift in tone unsettled him. But the assistant continued as if nothing had happened. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. You've all been granted absolute freedom. The creature's eyes gleamed as he listed, no laws, no order, no morality, no ethics. Does not that sound like a dream? His smile stretched unnaturally wide. You are free from all those meaningless constraints. The tension in the crowd thickened. But that's not all, the assistant went on. All physical limits that once held you back, gone. And depending on your actions, you can grow stronger, infinitely. He chuckled, comparing it to the protagonist of a movie. Think of this as your chance to become the hero, or villain, you always dreamed of being. He tilted his head. Isn't that wonderful? Then, with a snap of his fingers, he added, let me show you how it works. The man who had spoken earlier suddenly began to glow. Before he could react, a chunk of his body tore away. Blood sprayed in every direction. A horrified silence gripped the crowd. Then, the screams erupted. The fairy assistant gasped dramatically, placing a hand over his mouth. Oh dear, how clumsy of me, he said with mock regret. I do dislike noisy talkers. Someone in the crowd shouted, run. Panic broke loose as people scattered in every direction. The assistant sighed in annoyance. I said I hate noise. With another snap of his fingers, a girl in the crowd froze, tears streaming down her face. She whimpered, pleading for someone to save her. The assistant's face twisted in irritation. Enough! If you want to live, put in the effort. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, his anger vanished. A smile returned to his face. Much better. Now, let's continue. A stone with an intricate rune materialized in his hands. This, my dear survivors, is a rune, he explained. You can obtain one by killing living beings. The stone shimmered faintly as he turned it in his hand. There are 8 other types, each appearing randomly. This one is colorless. But if you work hard and grow, you'll collect more and become even stronger. His gaze swept over the terrified crowd. Now, who wants it? A hush fell over the people. No one dared move. Then, one hand rose. Hansu. He stood calmly, his expression unreadable. The assistant's eyes lit up with delight. Oh, how exciting. He immediately floated toward Hansu, beaming. Such enthusiasm. I like you already. The monster extended its hand, and Hansu followed suit. As their hands met, the fairy helper excitedly started rambling about how amazing runes were, how they could alter the laws of the world. The monster chimed in, stating that his muscle capacity had increased from 117 kilograms to 122.3 kilograms. But Hansu remained unimpressed, already familiar with this concept. His indifference dampened the fairy's enthusiasm, who had expected a more dramatic reaction. Clearing his throat, the fairy continued explaining. He emphasized that runes had various effects depending on their type, granting abilities beyond the understanding of traditional science. To demonstrate this once more, he asked if anyone wanted to give it a try. However, he abruptly decided against it. Instead, he left them with an important reminder. Regardless of what attribute a rune enhanced, it would never be a disadvantage. If they wanted to grow stronger and survive, they had to collect as many runes as possible. Tension spread through the crowd. People grew restless, shoving and cursing as they scrambled for the runes. The fairy helper watched the chaos with amusement. He observed the one who had received a rune earlier and figured that most of them didn't need further instructions. Floating toward Hansu, the fairy explained that touching one's right ear would reveal the number of runes they possessed. As he demonstrated, others instinctively reached for their ears, eager to check for themselves. With a smirk, the fairy noted that humans love to quantify things. He then casually mentioned that an average person's stats were around 10, a basic benchmark. Hansu glanced at his status and saw that his strength had increased by a single point. If he kept collecting runes after hunts, he could also enhance attributes related to mana and magic power. Runes could be obtained from any living creature. Prey didn't matter. The fairy's gaze lingered on a sullen-looking boy before shifting to a girl. He reminded her that this system was not much different from the world they had lived in before. Then, as if sensing the growing unease, the fairy helper decided to offer them something that might lift their spirits. Suddenly, objects materialized in their hands. Weapons. The monster told them to forget the past and focus on what lay ahead. The boy stared at the weapon in his grip as the monster's voice rang out once more, urging them to enjoy their new life. Once he was gone, training would begin, and they had better give it their all. A murmur spread through the crowd at the mention of training. But before anyone could process what was happening, a piercing scream tore through the air. Behind them, a swarm of monsters loomed, their grotesque figures illuminated by eerie, glowing eyes. They snarled and bared their teeth, their guttural growls sending waves of fear through the gathered people. Panic set in. Someone hesitantly asked if this was part of the training. The monsters advanced, their steps slow but deliberate. The people froze, paralyzed with terror. Just as the tension peaked, someone raised a hand and urged everyone to stay calm. A girl spoke up, telling them not to panic and to back away carefully. Hansu planted his feet firmly, locking eyes with the creatures. He could feel the fear spreading among the people like wildfire. Someone tried to retreat but bumped into another man, who scowled in irritation. The first man, however, pointed forward, his voice uneasy. Something was wrong. A wall. They were trapped. He pounded on the invisible barrier, demanding to be let out, but there was no response. Others turned to stare in shock, only to realize that the walls were closing in. Their only way out was blocked by the snarling monsters. Then, chaos erupted. The monsters charged. Their shrieks filled the air as they lunged at the terrified people. Instinctively, those with weapons raised them in defense. A boy clenched his knife and yelled that he would not go down so easily. Then, something strange happened. His attention snapped to a man who had somehow slipped through the wall. The man scratched his head, baffled. He had no idea how he did it. He had simply walked through. Another voice spoke up, saying, 49. The number was decreasing. Realization dawned. Only 50 people could escape. Panic took hold. People shoved and cursed, desperately trying to reach the wall. Hansu watched in disdain. There were 100 of them. If they just stood together and fought, they could win. Sure, there would be injuries, but the death toll would not be as high. Last time, around 40 had died to the goblins. That meant only 10 had survived after failing to escape. Not this time. Hansa gripped his knife tighter. He was not about to let things play out the same way. First, he had to clear this area. Then, he would move forward. The goblins lunged. Screams filled the air. Some people begged for their lives. Others fought, their weapons slashing wildly. Blood splattered across the ground. A goblin swung its club at Hansu. He caught it mid-swing. With a swift motion, he slit the goblin's throat. Hansa hurled the monster aside and braced himself for the next attack. The boy took his stance while the onlookers watched in shock and fear. Hansu, breathing heavily, finally stepped away, leaving behind a trail of goblin corpses. Wiping the blood from his cheek, he noted that his body felt just as it had decades ago, an unsettling realization. The boy crouched and gathered the fallen runes, considering himself lucky. His agility had improved by a tenth, but agility was not just about speed. It altered his perception of time, sharpening his reflexes tenfold. What once took moments now happened in an instant. A goblin suddenly hurled a dagger at Hansu. Instinctively, he twisted, catching the blade midair before launching it right back. The dagger struck the goblin square in the head. Dropping to one knee, Hansa barely had time to recover before the remaining goblins charged. They sensed his exhaustion and attacked, their bloodlust driving them forward. Hansa tightened his grip on the cleaver, anticipating their frenzy. As soon as they saw blood, they lost all restraint. With a firm grip, he slashed through them, his movements precise and deadly. One goblin fell, its chest split open. Hansa followed up with a swift elbow strike, then clenched his fist, feeling the surge of strength in his body. Someone in the crowd wondered aloud if he was really fighting alone. Inspired, the spectators rallied, cursing as they rushed to join the battle. Humans and goblins clashed in a chaotic melee. Hansa fought without hesitation, knowing that reckless rushing was not usually necessary. But right now, there was no choice. Another attack came. He countered instantly, unable to afford distractions. He thought of all those who had been kidnapped, not just here, but across the world. The numbers were staggering. The first newcomers were protected in a training zone for 3 months, but after that, they were thrown into battle alongside those who had survived for years. Hansa thought of those seasoned warriors as he drove his blade into another goblin. He spotted another rune, grasping it tightly. Every bit of strength counted. Keljian had made the right decision sending him here. The battlefield was littered with goblin corpses. Someone in the crowd gasped in disbelief at the sheer number of enemies Hansu had slain. The boy stared at the fallen goblins, then at Hansu, who stood before them, exhausted but unwavering. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some called him a monster. A fairy among them watched in admiration, her voice barely above a whisper. Hansu remained in the center of the shaken crowd, unmoved. The fairy observed the battlefield and nodded in approval. You all did well. It must have taken a lot of effort, she said, glancing at the survivors. And there are still plenty of you left. However, the people didn't share her sentiment. They glared at the strange creature with hostility. Behind her, the barrier began to shift, slowly opening. She smiled, unfazed by their anger. Now you understand how to survive here. Just keep going as you are. Without waiting for a response, she slipped through the gap in the barrier. I have other zones to visit, so I'll leave you to it. Good luck. But the crowd was not willing to let her off so easily. Shouts rang out as they tried to drive her away, but she was already gone. Hansu exhaled, wiping the blood from his face. Opening his interface window, he assessed the situation. Compared to everything else that had happened, this was not too bad. He examined his stats, small gains, but still progress. For training purposes, it was decent. His eyes landed on the item in his hands. It looked useful, something worth keeping. A blade, perhaps a token of acknowledgement. He shut his eyes, lost in thought. His priority was clear. Find a way to grow stronger as quickly as possible. He slid his hand into his pocket, thinking back to his comrades. What would they do in his place? Then, a particular memory resurfaced. A conversation with a certain man. The guy had been drinking from a mug, casually mentioning something intriguing. Ever heard of a hidden dungeon? Hansa had repeated the question back, intrigued. The man smirked, explaining that it was located in the training area, a dungeon of increased difficulty. They had clinked their mugs together, the man chuckling. Not gonna lie, I couldn't clear it. No one has. Hansa took a sip, studying him. The man adjusted his collar with a proud grin. You're telling me you only made it halfway and got this strong? He scoffed. If I were a Valkyrie, do you think I'd still be here? Hansa frowned at the remark, but the man continued. If this were the past, I'd definitely give it a shot. If I cleared it, I'd be strong enough to take you down for sure. One thing was certain, the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. The harder the battle, the more valuable the outcome. Does not it make you curious? The man had asked. What's waiting at the end? Now, Hansa stared ahead, his expression serious. His next target was clear. Looking to the side, he considered what needed to be done before attempting the dungeon. The training process followed a set pattern. Hundreds of people grouped together, assigned to different zones, working in cycles. Each area was their battleground for a week, and after 3 months, the cycle would end. Before challenging the dungeon, he had steps to take, and he intended to take them all. Once the second stage of training ended, the safe zone would disappear completely. There would be no way to contact those who had arrived earlier. In the first stage of training, 2 hidden parts existed, but no one had ever reached the end. To clear the hidden dungeon, Hansu needed to obtain both. This was the fastest way to grow stronger. For now, his focus was on finding the hidden part that was closest. His eyes scanned the area, stopping on a moss-covered sign. This was where he needed to search. Before he could begin, a voice interrupted. "What are you up to?" Hansu turned to see a man and a woman in a heated argument. The man insisted he had only suggested they go together, while the woman firmly refused, saying they would be fine on their own. Then the man grabbed her wrist. All around, similar conflicts were breaking out. The so-called strong were taking advantage of the weak. The man smirked. "If you want to survive, you need to cooperate," he said, ignoring the fear in the girl's eyes. "Isn't that what you want? For all of us to make it out alive?" Hansu exhaled sharply. He had no time for this. He needed to find the hidden part within a week, or it would be gone. Just as he turned away, another voice called out. "Hey, wait!" Hansu glanced over his shoulder. A guy with headphones hesitated before stepping closer. "What's your name?" he asked, looking unsure. Hansu frowned. "Do we know each other?" The guy flinched but repeated the question, this time with unease. Before he could answer, another voice cut in. "Have you lost your mind?" A blond man stormed forward and threw a punch at Hansu. "We were together before we got here. What the hell are you doing?" Hansu caught the movement but didn't react. His eyes narrowed. These two knew his name. How? Then, it clicked. The blonde's furious expression. The guy with headphones. They were familiar. His classmates. Memories surfaced. They had started this journey together. But they had died. He had forgotten about them. Just then, the girl from earlier yanked her hand free, stepping toward the group with determination. Sunlight hit her face, and Hansu suddenly remembered her name. "Yo, am I he?" She approached him hesitantly. Hansu noted that with her appearance, trouble would find her sooner rather than later. The man in the jacket scowled, his face twisting in frustration. "You're seriously ignoring me?" he snapped. His eyes darted toward Hansu, then to his own group. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He had seen Hansu take down an entire gang of goblins single-handedly. But the man hesitated. Hansu looked tired. Maybe. A glance at his gang confirmed it. They were thinking the same thing. If they attacked now, they might have a chance. Taking a step forward, he grinned. Raising a hand, he called out mockingly. "Where are your manners?" We weren't finished talking yet. His gaze settled on Hansu. "So, who's this guy?" He eyed him up and down. "You look pretty rough. Think you can handle much in that condition?" The gang exchanged knowing smirks. Their leader chuckled, turning his attention back to Yo Am I He. "Come here," he said, his voice sickly sweet. "I'm asking nicely." His grin widened. "More is always better, right? So why don't you come to us, before we come to you?" Hansu scanned the gang with a calm gaze before turning to the blonde. With a sigh, he muttered about how filth was everywhere. These guys were still high off their first victory, completely unaware of the real enemy they were up against. Their overconfidence blinded them to reality. As he stepped forward, the gang leader tensed, watching him warily. Hansu's eyes darkened as he asked if the man even understood where this was all heading. Without warning, he shoved the leader back. His grip tightened around his dagger, veins pulsing with barely restrained anger. "Got anything to say?" he asked coldly. Before the gang leader could respond, another man, one in a red shirt, stepped in front of him, raising a hand. He told Hansu to relax. Meanwhile, a large, shaven-headed man smirked. He assured Hansu that they weren't bad people. They even called him boss. With an easy smile, the boss made an offer. Why not join them? Given the current situation, it was clear they all had a role to play. His eyes, however, held a sharp edge. "Would not it be smarter to work together?" he asked. Hansu studied him carefully. This man had already adapted to this brutal world. He no longer hid his true nature. He thrived here, like a predator in its element. Hansu clenched his dagger, debating whether to take him out right now. Then, Air's voice echoed in his mind. There was no point in spilling unnecessary blood, she reminded him. But she also warned him, never spare the parasites that would harm humanity in the Great War. She urged him to protect the people he encountered, to do what he could for them. Hansu looked down for a moment, lost in thought. These guys? He didn't have time to deal with them now. Besides, people like them had a habit of destroying themselves sooner or later. Turning away, he dismissed them. "Not my problem. Get lost." The boss watched him leave, his expression unreadable. When his assistant started to panic, he cut him off sharply. "Enough with the hysteria," he said. They had more important things to focus on. He turned his gaze forward, toward the suffering people around them. In this twisted place filled with monsters, he had a vision, to bring order, no matter what it took. Hansu recalled the fairy and scoffed, calling her a devil. Still, something about this place intrigued him. With a smirk, he muttered that the strong ruled here. so why not take advantage of the opportunity? The boss led his group in the opposite direction, the crowd following without hesitation. Watching them go, the blonde shook his head. How is it that people are scarier than monsters? He murmured. His gaze then drifted to Hansu, who was walking away. Hansu had always been a bit strange, but had he always been like this? Wiping the blood from his face, Hansu barely noticed as someone caught up to him. It was the orphan, the boy with the dark, sullen expression. He hadn't paid much attention to him before, but now, the kid was looking at him intently. Why are you acting like you don't know us? He asked. Hansu frowned, his gaze sharp. Memory loss, he said simply. His classmates exchanged confused glances. Minnie giggled. Why do you sound like some old man? She teased. Hansu glanced at her, not sure what was so funny. Minhee, still laughing, blushed as she stole glances at him. He thought for a moment. She had a bright future ahead of her in their old world. But here, beauty was a double-edged sword. If used well, it was a powerful weapon. He could only hope she knew how to handle it. They walked through the ruins in silence. The blonde fidgeted, uneasy. We haven't said a word this whole time, she said, scanning their surroundings. Then she turned to Hansu with forced cheer. So, where are we going? Hansu didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept walking. You'll understand when you see it, he finally said. Up ahead, his first target came into view. They stopped in front of a subway entrance, Gangnam Station. The hidden section lay below. Minhee blinked. Wait, why are we here? Hansu exhaled and rubbed his mouth. He didn't have time to explain everything. If not for S words, he would not have even brought them. He curled his fingers slightly, resigning himself to the situation. I have a feeling, he said. His voice was calm, but there was certainty in his words. I lost my memories, but in return, I gained power. His classmates stared at him, stunned. Hansu was not sure why they were so shocked. After everything they had seen, a literal fairy, monsters, was it really that surprising? The blonde leaned toward her friend. Are we sure we should be following him? She whispered. Hansu suddenly turned, cutting off any further doubts. I'm not forcing you. His tone was firm. I respect people's choices. If you don't want to come, step aside and watch from the sidelines. The blonde scowled. She was irritated by how smug he sounded, but something in his attitude made her uneasy. Did he really know something? With a deep breath, Hansu stepped forward and began his descent. The blonde hesitated, her doubts gnawing at her. Still, she followed, as did the rest of the group. As they walked down, she tried to shake off her nerves. Flashing a nervous grin, she leaned toward Hansu. Are you sure this place is safe? She asked. It feels creepy. Hansu didn't break his stride. We're meeting some friends. The blonde blinked. Friends? Who the hell would live in a place like this? They reached the bottom. The air was thick with something unspoken. Whatever was down here, they were about to find out. Hansu slid his hands into his pockets and suddenly came to a stop. His gaze dropped to the ground. Without a word, he pulled out his dagger. Minhee let out a startled squeal. The blonde spun around at the sound, eyes widening. Tai-sung! Someone shouted. Hansu's cold stare locked onto the trembling Tai-sung, whose face twisted in horror. But before anyone could react, Hansu drove his dagger into a fang caterpillar. Blood oozed from the severed insect as Hansu pulled out the blade. This dungeon is modeled after Gangnam Station, he said flatly. Those green bugs? They come out when they sense ground vibrations. The creature's remains twitched, then disintegrated into energy, leaving behind a small pebble. Hansu picked it up, inspecting it as he continued. They hate sunlight, so they usually stay hidden. But if one of these things gets a bite on you, he turned to face the others. Your flesh will be torn apart in seconds. You won't even have time to react before you pass out and die. Fear crept over his classmates as they processed his words. Hansu sighed. I'll show you an easy way to deal with them. Without hesitation, he plunged his dagger into another bug's throat. Knives were handed out, and soon, the group was slashing at the crawling insects. Hansu observed them carefully. These four might actually be useful. His eyes landed on a trembling boy wearing headphones. He stepped closer. If you're not confident, step only on whole tiles, Hansu instructed. If you see a crack with dirt inside, stab it, but keep your hands protected. Minhee, wiping sweat from her forehead, chimed in cheerfully. So basically, hit the spots where the ground rises. The blonde chuckled. Like a game of whack-a-mole. The boy in the headphones closed his eyes, gripping his knife tightly. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself. But just as he steadied himself, something burst out of the ground behind him. A beetle lunged at him with a screech. Before he could react, Hansu shoved him aside and slashed the creature cleanly across its body. The severed pieces thudded to the ground at his feet. The boy blinked in shock, then quickly smiled in gratitude. Thanks, he mumbled. Hansu barely acknowledged him. It was clear, this guy was not much of a fighter. He'd just end up being a burden. Without another word, Hansu turned and kept walking. The boy lowered his head, frustration evident on his face. The blonde, still trying to process everything, stepped closer to Hansu. You knew this would happen, he said, narrowing his eyes. How? Hansa glanced at him and smirked. Didn't I tell you? His voice held a hint of amusement. Then, with a satisfied grin, he added, it's my superpower. The blonde froze, momentarily dumbfounded. The others looked just as stunned. But Hansu was not interested in explaining further. Let's focus on hunting, he said, moving forward without another word. While the others hesitated, Hansa turned away, casually spinning the fallen stone in his hands. He glanced back at them and asked why they weren't picking up the runes. He gave an awkward smile and admitted that they thought it would be better if the hero collected them instead. In return, he could protect them, just like in the games. She trailed off, embarrassed, quickly adding that it was not as if picking up the runes would suddenly make them as strong as Superman. Hansa frowned. He's reasoning was flawed. Relying on him in exchange for safety was not a smart decision. With a sigh, he turned back to them. Your prey belongs to you alone, he said firmly. If you want to travel with me, you'll need to follow the basic rules. Those who had survived in the abyss for decades had established a simple code to ensure cooperation. Your prey belongs to you alone. In group hunts, resources are distributed based on need and contribution. In times of crisis, relationships built on goodwill fall apart. His classmates stared at him in confusion, but Hansa knew it would not take long for them to understand just how brutal this world was. He met their uncertain gazes and added, first, rely on your own skills. If you're useless, I won't hesitate to leave you behind. The group tensed at his words, but this was just reality. Tai-sung glanced at the blonde beside him, who nodded in silent agreement. Hansa looked at them with irritation but let it go. Sooner or later, they'd understand. Soon, they'd be fighting over runes like starving dogs over scraps. Without another word, the group began collecting loot from the fallen bodies. That's when Tai-sung called out, Hey, check this out. In his hands, he held a strange-looking rune, a deep purple stone that pulsed faintly. His instinct screamed that this was different. If he took it, something inside him would change. This was the essence of the Akrul troll tribe. Tai-sung glanced at Hansu, remembering what he'd said earlier about distributing loot. If he made a big deal out of this, it could put him in an awkward position. Instead, he simply smiled and asked, Since I found this, can I keep it? Hansa gave a calm nod. That reaction caught Tai-sung off guard. He had expected some resistance, but the hero seemed unfazed. Hansu studied the rune, recognizing its potential. A solid starting skill. It offered both defense and regeneration, two crucial survival traits. And since it was a passive ability, it didn't require activation. The only downside was an increased appetite. But that problem could be handled easily. As one's strength grew, so did the rune's power. Smart individuals with mastery over magic could gather hundreds of abilities. Keldien, for example, had acquired more than 1,000. And this was just the beginning. Hansa silently observed the group, his thoughts racing. His eyes gleamed with understanding. His situation was unlike anyone else's. Scattered runes lay on the ground, and a hand reached for one. A bright light flared, making Hansa squint. He clenched his fists. Ayres let out a sigh and said, as she suspected, the hero's skill limit was 7. Covering her face in frustration, she muttered that if they had known earlier, he could have chosen stronger skills. A limit of 7 was a fatal flaw for anyone else. But Hansu was different. His strength far surpassed this restriction. The abilities he acquired weren't stagnant. They evolved endlessly. What started as basic regeneration from a lizard essence could eventually rival Kang Tai's legendary immortality technique. His speed-enhancing rapid dash could transform into something as formidable as Keldien's signature move, Rupture of Space. It was because of this ability that Hansu had earned the nickname 7 Stars. While others spent 20 years honing their skills, he caught up in a fraction of the time. That was why he had been chosen to return to the past. A small smile crossed his lips before fading. He couldn't afford any missteps. His choices mattered now more than ever. Ayres warned him to be careful with his skill selection. If everything went according to plan, he would breeze through training like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Men examined Tai-sung's rune with fascination. He decided to take it. The moment he did, the rune melted, releasing a surge of light. The system displayed a notification. Physical resistance acquired. Tai-sung smirked, pleased with his decision. He checked his stats and saw a noticeable increase in several attributes. With a smug glance at Hansu, he thought to himself, he would never pass up an opportunity like this. Curling his lips into a grin, he mentally challenged the hero. Just wait. I'll catch up to you soon. Hansu simply waved and motioned for the group to move forward. Tai-sung slung an arm around his shoulder and warned that things were about to get even more dangerous. Let's stick together, he suggested. Tai-sung, meanwhile, turned to Yo-Mi, asking if she needed him. Yo-Mi blinked, confused. Why was he looking at her while saying that? Hansu shot a displeased glance at the blonde. Does he really see me as his rival now? He wondered. The thought was almost amusing. Still, he wasn't going to entertain it. With a firm motion, he shrugged off the arm around his shoulder. Just because he found it amusing didn't mean he'd tolerate it. The group pressed on. As they walked, Hansu's gaze shifted downward with concern. We need to go deeper, he said. The girl hesitated. Why? The subway, he replied. She stared at him in shock. Wait, the trains are still running. Hansa simply said, you'll see for yourself, and took a few more steps forward. As he walked, his mind drifted to the past. There was someone who had never made a single mistake. He recalled sitting down for a drink with a stranger. The man had boasted about his dungeon experiences, confidently stating how many he had conquered. But before he could finish, another voice cut in. Those dungeons you're talking about? They are nothing compared to the ones I've been to. The braggart turned sharply, glaring at the interruption. Who do you think you are, butting into other people's conversations? A dark-haired man calmly folded his hands together. He had overheard enough. The so-called expert was spewing nonsense. Without hesitation, he pushed the braggart aside and took a seat next to Hansu. Leaning in slightly, he spoke with quiet intensity. If you really want to get stronger fast, there's one thing you need to find. Hansu remembered the way his eyes gleamed with excitement. It's in the training area. Somewhere in the subway. The stations varied in design, but structurally, they were the same, at least until the third floor. There, a portal sat in the center of the stairs. If you stepped through and followed the path to the very bottom, a train would be waiting. Catching it was the real challenge. But if you managed to board, that was it. Your path to power would be set. The only problem? Reaching it was near impossible. And the train only left once a day. Now, standing at the entrance, Hansa stared ahead. I have to make it there today. No matter what. They approached the portal. Mihe's eyes widened in surprise. Wait, this isn't Gangnam Station. She had been to Gangnam plenty of times, but she had never seen an entrance like this before. Anxiety crept in as she instinctively touched her neck. Are you sure about this? She asked. You don't even know what's waiting for us in there. Hansa remained unfazed, his gaze steady. I'm going where my instincts tell me to. Like I said before, if anyone wants to leave, now's the time. Tai-sung grinned. You think I'm gonna back out now? I'm in. Mihe hesitated for a moment, then pressed a hand to her chest. I'll go too. Hansa glanced at her, reading her expression. She's worried, and she knows exactly what kind of danger she's in. Someone like her, someone vulnerable, had even more reason to grow stronger. Even if it meant sacrificing everything. Mihe, on the other hand, looked ahead with barely contained excitement. The blonde shrugged and waved a hand dismissively. We'll stay here. Nothing's stopping us from just continuing to hunt. And with that, their paths split. Sang-jin, though trembling, declared that he would go with them. Down Tai-sung chuckled, questioning where Sang-jin suddenly planned to go when just moments ago, he had been too scared to move. Sang-jin shot him a glare and snapped that it wasn't any of his concern. Tai-sung raised an eyebrow in surprise. But before he could say anything, Sang-jin doubled down, stating that whatever he did was none of Tai-sung's business. Tai-sung scoffed, saying there was too much talk coming from someone so useless. He was about to continue when Hansa cut him off with a sharp enough. Closing his eyes, Hansa told them to quit the pointless bickering. He slipped a hand into his pocket and reminded them that time was short. They could do whatever they wanted. Tai-sung turned away, his veins bulging with frustration. Internally, he seethed, wondering how they dared to humiliate him in front of Mihe. Meanwhile, the hero stepped into the portal, focusing on the training area. Thousands of mobs roamed the landscape, and though the environment varied, some elements remained consistent. He glanced at the group behind him, then froze. Sang-jin and Mihe, standing behind him, looked just as shocked. Before them stood a convenience store. Confused voices echoed as people wondered how it got there. Without hesitation, they entered. Sang-jin immediately browsed the shelves while Hansu made his way to the refrigerator. The rumors had been true. There really was always a store on the second floor of the subway. Could this be some kind of hidden reward? Dais picked up a knife, wondering if he should take different weapons. Meanwhile, Hansu approached the counter, scanning the items. He recalled someone mentioning that this place was more like a supermarket than a convenience store. It really had everything one could need. Picking up a pot, he placed it on a scale. The cashier, puzzled, asked what he was doing. Hansu, weighing the bag in his hand, simply replied that he was cooking. Mihe, surprised, asked what exactly he was making. Without hesitation, Hansu poured greenworm blood into the pot. She immediately recalled how he had collected it, by squeezing the blood from corpses with his bare hands. Now, with a faint smirk, Hansu began tearing into the green goblin's skin. The moment their flesh made contact with the green blood, it became highly toxic. Goblins had evolved to resist the poison of green worms, making their own venom exceptionally strong. Dais grinned, inhaling deeply. Smells amazing. Give me a piece, he said eagerly. Hansa shot him an annoyed look. It's poison. Dais instantly recoiled in fear. Why didn't you say so earlier? Hansa scoffed. You were the one sniffing around for the scent. Mihe watched him curiously. I never would have thought to do something like this, she admitted. How do you even know how to make poison? Hansa glanced at her before replying flatly, it's my ability. My head is full of knowledge. Tai-sung narrowed his eyes, sensing that Hansa was dodging the question. In reality, Hansu's mind had nearly burst while trying to memorize everything. He recalled Keldien's words from the past. Going back in time would be meaningless without knowledge. Keldien had slammed his hand on the board, emphasizing that this information was crucial. It wasn't just about finding items. It was about knowing how to strengthen them. Keldien tossed the pointer over his shoulder and said that if the hero had any brains, he would understand why all of this was important. He warned him not to share this information with anyone. Slamming the board again, he told them to memorize everything. Knowing the future wouldn't prevent destruction, it would only accelerate the downfall of the abyss. Then he looked directly at Hansu. You must not become Prometheus, he warned. Only share your knowledge when absolutely necessary, and only according to the plan. Hansu stared at his reflection. Without knowing the exact proportions and brewing time, this recipe was worthless. That was fine. He poured the thick purple liquid into a bottle and smeared poison from a small tube onto his dagger. Mihe's eyes widened as she watched the venom drip from the blade. Can we have some too? She asked hesitantly. The hero extended his hand. Sure, but it'll cost you half a power or stamina rune per use. Tai-sung glared at him. You're seriously charging us? Why are you being so petty? Hansa turned his back to him. I could give it to you for free, he admitted. Then, lowering his head slightly, he added, but in the long run, I don't think that would be a good idea. The group fell silent. Hansu understood. One-sided relationships never lasted. Mihe hesitated before nodding. Fine, I'll give you the runes later. But at least let me try it first. Hansa turned to her abruptly, handing her the tube. Be careful, he warned. If this gets on your skin, it's going to hurt. A lot. Tai-sung clenched his jaw. If the hero kept acting like this, he wouldn't even get a chance to steal the poison. He eyed Hansa carefully. What if I use it first and give you the runes later? Sangjin cut in. Same for me. One by one, the group took turns passing the tube around. Hansu ignored them and focused on his own preparations. After a while, he slung his backpack over his shoulder and picked up his bags. This should be enough. As he turned, Mihe approached. We're ready, she said. Then she noticed his expression. Why are you looking at us like that? Hansa scanned them from head to toe. His classmates were loaded down with supplies, bags, weapons, anything they could carry. He sighed. Are you guys heading out to fight? Or trying to become bait? He sat down and crossed his arms. If you don't want to spend the rest of your lives fighting, bury most of that stuff now. If you take everything, others will come after you. The group hesitated, realizing the truth in his words. Mihe glanced at him. At first, she had thought he was just quiet. But now, she could see it. He wasn't just strong. He was an exceptional fighter. Embarrassed, she quickly patted his hand. Then, as if just realizing something, she looked up at him. Hey, why don't you have superpowers? Mihe reached for the bag on the ground, lost in thought. Hundreds of millions of people had vanished, yet not a single one had ever been found. Until yesterday, she had held on to hope. But now, she realized she might be stuck here for the rest of her life. The weight of that truth crushed her. Falling to her knees, she clenched her fists. I don't want to die. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to look straight ahead. If survival meant doing whatever it took, then so be it. She glanced at Hansu. Standing next to him, she felt something. But before she could process it, he met her gaze. Embarrassed, she quickly looked away. They both turned forward again in silence. Tai-sung shot Hansu a look of irritation. You act like the center of the universe, he muttered before tossing his bag to Sangjin. Hey, carry it. Then, stepping ahead, he turned back toward Hansu. That superpower you mentioned earlier. He narrowed his eyes. Can we get one too? Hansu glanced up. Maybe. The three of them froze, stunned. Their faces flushed with anticipation. Seriously? Hansu nodded. Yeah, some people develop abilities here that they never had before. His gaze darkened as he recalled a warning from Keldien. Be careful. There were people in this world who had awakened powers they didn't possess in reality. Keldien had spoken at length about it, but in the end, his message had been simple. Eliminate anyone who becomes useless to you. Hansu frowned, irritated by the memory. The weight of those words pressed down on him. Tai-sung sensed something was off. Watching Hansu's expression shift, he smirked. You've gotten pretty cold. Huh? He stepped closer. Still mad at me? You were pissed at me when we first got here. Hansu didn't answer. He simply kept walking. He had nothing left to say. 4 or 5 years before coming here, he had fought an endless battle. The abyss had only grown stronger, its monsters increasing in number. At first, there had been hope, but eventually, that too had faded, buried beneath despair. Covered in blood and bruises, Hansu had stared ahead, feeling nothing. No fear, no hope, just exhaustion. Now, he looked away, silent once more. Tai-sung watched him, confused. What's with him? Annoyed, he turned away. Damn superpowers. He refused to make a fool of himself next to Hansu. Tai-sung rubbed his chin, deep in thought. I'll get stronger. Then, he decided, I'll start dating Mihe. I'll get rid of Sangjin. And Hansu, I'll make him follow my orders. But before he could dwell on that plan any further, Hansu suddenly barked, "Stop. Everyone, stand still." Without hesitation, he crouched down and reached for the ground. As the blonde struggled to grasp the situation, Hansu examined the slime on his fingers. It didn't have the sharp, sour stench of a sword snail, and there were no half-dried entrails nearby, meaning it wasn't from a chopped-up zombie. That left only one possibility. San quickly put the pieces together. Land mermaids. Just as the realization hit, the creatures emerged from the darkness, slithering toward them. Hansu studied the slime again and checked the tracks. There was no doubt. These were land mermaids. They moved slowly, but once they injected their prey with paralytic venom, they would drag it through the tunnels. However, Hansu knew that if they acted fast, they could take them down in seconds. A sinister grin flickered in the shadows, but Hansu wasn't fazed. He had a plan. Taisung narrowed his eyes at him. "Quit acting like you know everything." Hansu ignored him and turned to the group. "You guys are in for a surprise," he said, motioning for them to follow. As confusion spread among them, Anu stepped forward with Molotov cocktails, pouring the homemade mixture into bottles. They did not have gasoline, but it should still do the trick. Sangjin and Yo-Mi exchanged looks. The girl sighed. "Don't tell me you made this with something you found in a store." Taisung took a bottle and turned it in his hands. "If this is part of a superpower, then I gotta admit, it's pretty useful." Then he glanced at Hansu. "You like it here more than your old world, don't you? You can do whatever you want." Hansu smirked. Taisung stepped back. "What? Why are you looking at me like that? Did I say something wrong?" In Hansu's mind, Keljin and Es were still arguing over whether Toon even deserved to exist. Shaking off the thought, Hansu grabbed a stick and started sketching a rough plan in the dust. "One of us throws the Molotov. As soon as it hits, the rest rush in and attack." He added 3 more figures to his drawing. The group silently watched as he mapped it out. "The one in the vanguard gets priority when we distribute runes," he continued. Taisung lifted his chin proudly. "I'll go first. Someone competent has to lead." Hansu glanced at the others. "And who's throwing the Molotov?" Sangjin and Yo-Mi exchanged awkward glances. Neither wanted to challenge the other. Yo-Mi suddenly put on a pitiful, cat-like expression, and Sangjin flinched, looking away. The sight of her pleading gaze practically set him on fire. Before things got out of hand, Hansu cut in. "We'll take turns." Shadows stretched across the station floor as the squad moved forward. Sangjin tried to gauge how far they had come. He did not want to turn back. But deep down, he wondered, did they really want him here, or was he just tagging along to avoid being left behind? The group moved forward in silence. Sangjin nervously gripped the Molotov in his hands, then fidgeted with the straps of her backpack. Noticing her unease, he glanced at her just as Hansu came to an abrupt stop. "They're close," Hansu warned. The sickening sounds of something slithering through the darkness reached them. Hansu shifted into a fighting stance. Yo-Mi flinched. "Throw it," Hansu ordered. Her hands shook as she lit the cloth, repeating to herself that she couldn't afford to slow them down. The flames quickly spread, the fire consuming the fabric. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and hurled the bottle forward. The glass shattered just as a mermaid lunged from the shadows. Flames exploded over its body, and it screeched in agony. "I did it," Yo-Mi whispered, barely believing it herself. Hansu didn't waste a second. "Move," he commanded, charging into the fray. "These things spit paralytic poison," he reminded them as he plunged his knife into the nearest monster. Taisung watched, stunned, as Hansu leapt from one mermaid to the next, slicing through them with terrifying efficiency. Runes burst from their bodies. "That bastard's trying to take them all," Taisung thought bitterly. He was still fuming when another mermaid lunged at him. Snapping back to reality, he swung his sword, slashing the creature down. Blood splattered across the ground. He glanced at the corpse, then at his blade, a smug grin forming. "Damn, this poison works well." Nearby, Hansu gathered the runes. "That poison was worth it," he said, unfazed. Taisung caught his reflection in his knife and smirked. With this power, he'd catch up to Hansu in no time. Another bottle smashed into a mermaid's skull. Another was sliced apart. The battle raged on, fire and blood mixing with the monster's shrieks. Hansu thought to himself that using Molotovs against creatures covered in flammable poison was the perfect strategy. The dull edge of his blade didn't matter. He drove it deep into a mermaid's shoulder. It let out a piercing scream as its wound began to smoke. "That's exactly why I prepared the poison," he thought. Behind him, Taisung fought with exhilaration, his focus shifting as 2 runes dropped near a corpse. He reached out greedily. They were his. A sudden splatter of slime hit his leg. Pain shot through him as he collapsed to the ground. His leg convulsed violently, and humiliation burned through him. Everyone saw. The mermaid loomed closer, its grotesque face growing larger in his vision. Fiery, predatory eyes flickered in the darkness. "Get away from me!" Taisung yelled, trying to scramble back. Yo-Mi rifled through her bag. "I'm out of Molotovs," she muttered, then turned to Sangjin. "We're switching." Sangjin's hands trembled as he flicked the lighter. The flame caught, But before he could react, the mermaid was already upon him. Sangjin screamed. The bottle slipped from his grasp. Taesung watched in horror as the life-saving Molotov shattered uselessly to the side. Fury exploded in his chest. I told you to throw the Molotov, not take a piss, he roared at Sangjin. Panicked, Sangjin lashed out with his elbow, striking the mermaid square in the head. The monster collapsed, leaving him frozen in shock. A dagger flashed between them. Calm down, Hansu ordered. Stick to the plan. His voice was steady, unaffected. He glanced at them before turning away. Take a breather. Collect your runes. Taesung exhaled heavily, still shaken. I thought I was dead for sure, he muttered. He glanced at his leg, now fully healed. Guess my skill kicked in. Hansa looked at him. Boost your stamina. You'll recover faster. Then, with the same cool authority, he repeated, gather the runes. Quickly, Taesung stared at the measly handful in his palm, feeling a wave of frustration. This was all he got? Meanwhile, Hansu controlled the distribution with an iron grip. Sangjin quietly picked up his runes. Taesung's gaze darkened. Towering over the smaller boy, he loomed menacingly, eyes locked on his prize. A slow smirk crept across his face. Sangjin, he called. The boy hesitated, sensing danger. Taesung scoffed. Does your whole family have no shame? Sangjin's fists clenched, ready to protest. But before he could speak, Taesung grabbed him by the throat and lifted him with terrifying ease. A wicked grin spread across his face. Listen up, he sneered. You can't even throw a Molotov properly. Did you already forget how you nearly got me killed? Sangjin choked, hands clawing at Taesung's grip, trying to break free. His eyes filled with panic. What are you doing? Let go. Taesung shoved him back. Sangjin hit the ground hard, his headphones flying off. Clutching his chest, he gasped for air. Taesung crouched beside him, grabbing a fistful of his hair. Not long ago, you were crawling around like a pathetic weakling. Looks like you've forgotten your place. His voice was laced with mockery. Just stick to following orders for the rest of your life. Like your father. Stop pretending you're anything more. He turned away, reaching for the runes. A dagger stabbed into the ground between his hand and the pile. Taesung froze. Hansu's voice was calm but firm. Those aren't yours. Taesung clenched his jaw, eyes flickering with disbelief. You're seriously giving them to him. His voice rose. You might as well be throwing them in the trash. Hansa didn't react. Taesung's frustration boiled over. What did he even do to deserve them? He gestured wildly. We could split them. We don't need him. His breath hitched. His voice wavered. Teeth grinding, he spat. Tell me I'm wrong. Hansa remained calm, simply stating that the distribution should be fair, but it wasn't his place to interfere with how others survived. Taesung scoffed, calling it nonsense, and warned him not to regret his decision later. Hansa turned to Sangjin and advised him to learn how to protect what was his. As the others hurried to claim the remaining rooms, He stood back, watching the hero. She hesitantly approached, fiddling with the strap of a backpack, and asked if they were bothering him. Given the situation, she figured he might be annoyed watching them argue. Hansa kept his gaze forward and said it was fine. He wouldn't judge them for struggling with something they weren't good at. He caught up and asked if that meant he planned to stay with them until the end. She got the feeling Hansu acted like he could leave them at any moment. Hansa stopped, looking ahead. He reminded them that they were the ones who chose to follow him, and they were doing fine, so there was no need to worry. Then, his eyes lingered on the hero's back with a hint of sadness before he continued walking. As he passed the corpses of the mermaids, he noted how most of the runes they dropped focused on strength and endurance. It made sense. Physical stats were impossible to ignore now. It wasn't a bad investment either, considering how crucial they were for survival. The hero picked up one of the runes, recognizing that those were the exact traits he needed. He used a single rune, and his stats increased. Ahead, a bright light flickered. Then, a fairy appeared. She announced that the hero's total stats had surpassed 50, triggering his first achievement. Voices behind him questioned what kind of creature she was and why she had returned. The fairy pointed at him, declaring that he was the traveler who had raised his hand first. She had been curious about who was the fastest among them, and it seemed she had found her answer. Circling around him, she mused that they always admired those who put in the effort. She lightly touched his head, smiling, and said she had a small gift for the most active traveler. Then, she turned her gaze toward Mihe and asked if the hero was curious about what it would be. Mihe's hand trembled as she muttered that it wasn't fair. They hadn't started with the same stats. The fairy chuckled, telling her not to worry. It wasn't like she would even touch her. But then, the fairy suddenly darted toward Mihe, her grin turning sharp. She bared her fangs, her presence growing menacing. There are exceptions, she murmured. You could be one of them. Mihe froze in terror, but just as quickly as the tension spiked, the fairy leaned back and laughed. Just kidding. She gave the girl a playful push on the shoulder. Forget about fairness. You have your own strengths, don't you? Mihe realized the fairy was pointing at her. The creature smirked and remarked that she wasn't in a hurry to get rid of her. If she wanted to catch up to the others, she'd have to earn it. The Abyss assistant chuckled and said life had never been fair. Then, she fluttered up to the hero, grinning. It's time for your reward, she announced. He already had an idea of what it might be. The fairy's smile widened as she explained. For reaching a certain threshold in your combined physical stats, you get to choose 3 runes. Hansa remained calm, staring ahead. The fairy snapped her fingers, summoning the options. Agility, perception, healing, she listed, holding up the healing rune. This one's expendable, but it can patch up a hole in your stomach and cure most poisons. It's like having an extra life. The hero considered it. If a limb was torn off, it wouldn't be of much use. The others were stunned. A healing rune, something that could bring someone back from a near-death state. It was a chance to survive even the deadliest situations. While they silently hoped the hero would use at least 1 rune on them, Hansa studied the fairy and asked, "Do you have a rune that grants immunity to magic?" The fairy froze for a moment before revealing another set of runes. "There is one," she admitted. The group exchanged glances. The hero didn't seem particularly interested. Was this really such an ordinary choice to him? Hansu examined the options. Healing was valuable, but immunity to magic and physical damage was much rarer in the training area unless someone got extremely lucky, like Kangtai. Increasing stamina only affected endurance and recovery, but resistance to attacks, especially magic, was a far more fundamental defense. Physical attacks could be managed with experience, but magic was a different matter. He scratched his cheek, deep in thought. Finally, he checked his stats, deciding that what he had should be enough to keep him from dying right away. The fairy opened a swirling portal in the air. "Well, my job here is done," she said. Then, with a playful wink, she blew a kiss toward the hero. "Keep up the good work." Her words left the others speechless. Hansa turned to his companions, noticing their shocked expressions. "What's with those faces?" he asked. After some time, Mihi was locked in battle with a mermaid. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, realizing that fighting was becoming easier. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the hero at work again. She pressed a finger to her lips and froze, watching him. Hansa turned around as someone questioned him. They asked why his movements hadn't changed despite collecting so many runes. Another person stepped forward, pointing out that his speed was the same as before. Hansa raised his hand, revealing a glowing inscription. "This is the reason," he said. The others exchanged confused looks. "What is that?" someone finally asked. Hansu explained that it was a way to store runes. He told them to extend a hand and focus on storing a rune. It was that simple. Someone asked how he even knew about this. Adjusting his sleeve, Hansa smirked. "It's thanks to my ability." He leaned closer, intrigued. "Then I should try it too." Hansu immediately shut that idea down. "Don't." "Why not?" she asked, frowning. Glancing at the scattered runes, he explained. "For starters, it slows down the hunt. I can't store just any rune." He held up one. "And if I die, the runes I stored this way will drop." Sangjin furrowed his brows. "Then why collect them at all?" Hansu answered matter-of-factly. "I plan to trade them. Right now, it's difficult, but once the rules settle, they could work as a currency in the training area." He turned to the others. "You shouldn't do the same. Just use them as you get them." Tai-sung scoffed, raising his hand in frustration. "And who put you in charge? Just because we listen to you doesn't mean you get to look down on us. Why can't I do whatever I want?" Hansu exhaled sharply. These people still didn't understand the reality of where they were. He figured they'd only come to their senses when they hit rock bottom and suffered for it. His eyes fell to the dull blade in his grip. Scanning the group, he made a decision. They needed restructuring. Everyone watched him cautiously as he finally spoke. "Listen carefully." The hero's gaze was sharp as he laid out their options. "Follow me or collect runes. Do whatever you want. I don't care." Then, with a cold glare, he threw the blade at his feet. His tone dropped, menacing and firm. "But for now, hand over your weapons." Tai-sung let out a bitter laugh, his expression twisting in disbelief. "Are you serious? You want to rob us?" He gestured at Hansu's own weapons. "You already have yours. Why should we give you ours?" Hansu gestured toward the blade at his feet and scoffed. "We can't fight with this." He shook his head. "It's too crude, useless, really. And I need extra weapons." That set off Tai-sung, who exploded in frustration. But Hansu remained calm, his voice unwavering. "Do you understand me?" The boy clenched his fists. "You think I'll just let this slide?" he shouted. "What are we supposed to fight with if you take all our weapons? We're not just going to stand here doing nothing." His voice was laced with anger, but his smirk carried a challenge. "Or do you expect us to stand around sucking our fingers while you handle everything?" Sangjin hesitantly reached for Hansu, his voice wavering. "I'll give you everything because—" "Shut up," Dai's cut in sharply, stepping between Hansu and the others. He locked eyes with Hansu, standing his ground. Hansu observed him for a moment before asking plainly, "Do you want to fight?" Tai-sung forced a grin, though it was clear he was nervous. "Why would not I? I have nothing to be afraid of here." His voice dropped, bitter. "I've always hated that arrogant look of yours." Hansu scratched his cheek, unimpressed. He had expected the guy to back down, but he was not entirely surprised. He does not even know what's down there. His gaze turned cold as he made up his mind. Raising a finger, Hansa laid out two choices. 1. You leave and handle everything yourselves. Then he pointed at the group. 2. You step aside and watch me do it alone. His tone was icy. Your call. Sangjin fidgeted with his hands, looking uneasy. I'll step aside, he murmured. Yo am I? He hesitated but eventually nodded. Me too. If the hero says it's dangerous, then it must be. Taesung glanced between them, his frustration growing. That's exactly why we should fight together. His voice was desperate, sweat beading on his face. He just wants to leave us behind and take all the rewards for himself. He turned to the others, eyes blazing. Are you really going to let him do that? Hansa studied him, unbothered. He didn't care that Sangjin was a coward. But yo am I? He stepping back complicated things. He looked away, lost in thought. Friend. That's a nice word. He smirked to himself. If Keldyen were here, this guy would already be wandering lost in some no man's land. But Hansa couldn't waste any more time. He needed to move. Hands in his pockets, he turned toward the entrance. We'll settle this downstairs. If you can fight, I won't stop you. Taesung glared at him, suspicion creeping into his mind. If he's so eager to go alone, does he know something we don't? His gaze shifted toward the dark passage leading into the depths. Only a fool would pass up an opportunity like this. And with that, the descent began. All three of them burst onto the surface, gasping for breath. They squinted against the sudden light, their hearts pounding. Yo am I? He clutched her chest, her voice shaky. I knew it. It's too dangerous down there. Just moments earlier, they had all stood frozen in horror. A monstrous snake, far beyond anything they had faced before, loomed before them. Its massive form coiled in the darkness, unblinking eyes locked onto its prey. Taesung could hardly tear his gaze away. He glanced back, disbelief flooding his mind. Is he really going to fight that thing alone? It was insanity. But Hansu was not hesitating. He stood firm, eyes locked on the beast. The snake hissed sharply, then shot upward, its body towering over him. Hansa tensed, anticipating its attack. Without warning, the creature opened its maw, an ear-splitting beam of energy erupted forth. Hansa barely had time to react, diving behind a nearby column as the powerful blast struck. The impact sent cracks splintering through the stone. Dust and debris rained down. Peering from cover, Hansa checked his stats. As expected, his magic immunity had kept him standing. Even the sound waves, amplified by the beast's magic, couldn't break through. Still, he knew better than to underestimate it. The snake, assessing the destruction it had caused, slammed its tail against the crumbling column. Hansa seized the moment, dashing forward. This was not an opponent he could take lightly. The creature's tail lashed out again, barely missing him. But he knew its weakness. His eyes locked onto the small gaps between its thick scales. A perfect opening. With a swift, precise motion, he drove his blade into one of the unprotected areas. The snake let out an agonized screech. Dark blood sprayed from the wound. Hansa leapt back, his knife still embedded in the creature's flesh. The snake twisted in fury, its tail lashing out again. He dodged, but the beast rose above him, mouth gaping wide. Another beam fired. This time, it struck him head-on. Pain shot through his body as he gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. Before he could fully recover, the tail came swinging toward him again. The impact sent him crashing backward. Hansa pressed against the wall, catching his breath. So, it's finally regenerating. He watched as the wound he had inflicted began to close. The snake scanned the battlefield, searching for him. This was a training area, and despite his physical resilience, he was not immune to poison. Blood trickled from the beast's injury, but it was not enough. He knelt, gripping another blade with trembling fingers. 5 left, but 1 or 2 would not be enough to end this fight. He steadied himself. Then, with cold determination in his eyes, he launched forward once more. The snake lunged, fangs bared, another attack incoming. The ground trembled from the force of their battle. Meanwhile, he stared anxiously into the tunnel's darkness. Even from this distance, the echoes of the fight reached them. She clenched her hands, worry clouding her expression. Taesung turned to her, frowning. Why did you stop? His voice was tense. We don't even have a single weapon. We should head back to the store. A flicker of doubt crossed Yomi's face, but she shook it off. Without another word, she took off running. I have to check on him. Taesung gritted his teeth in frustration. Taesung's scowl deepened as he watched her go. He had been ignored since the moment they arrived here, and now, once again, he was left behind. Still cursing under his breath, he ran after her. The three of them ran forward in silence, their footsteps quick and tense. Then, as they got closer, Yomi's breath hitched. Her eyes widened in horror. Are you? She couldn't finish a sentence. Her body stiffened. Hansu was dangling in the air. The massive snake's fangs sunk deep into his arm. Many let out a horrified scream. Hansu grimaced, feeling the crushing force of the beast's jaws. I wasted too much time. He steadied his breathing, glancing at his clenched fist. But in his free hand, he still gripped a knife. Without hesitation, he drove the blade straight into the snake's mouth. The monster screeched, its jaws snapping open in pain. Hansa fell, landing with a controlled roll as the massive creature writhed. 3 daggers were now buried deep in its flesh, and though the fight was over, his arm throbbed from the bite. He glanced at his torn sleeve and sighed. I'll need to change. Still, thanks to his stats, it would heal soon enough. He knew that as monsters evolved, they gained resistance and enhanced regeneration. Poison became ineffective, and relying on skills too much only made things harder. But at earlier stages, paralyzing toxins worked well. Without that, I would not have lasted this long. Adjusting his grip on his knife, Hansu watched as the snake's body finally collapsed. Its glowing eyes dimmed and faded to black. He was the first to rush forward. Are you okay? Hansa barely spared them a glance as he walked past. You're still here? He hesitated before frowning. I was worried about you, but I guess I didn't need to be. She eyed his arm. How bad is it? Hansu exhaled. Just a scratch. Already healing. Tai-sung stood frozen, staring at the dead snake. His mind reeled. He took that thing down alone. He had always known Hansu was strong, but this was something else entirely. The gap between them was overwhelming. How am I supposed to compete with that? Meanwhile, Hansu crouched beside the monster's corpse, his lips curling slightly in amusement. He reached down and plucked something from its remains. Tai-sung stepped forward. What's that? Hansu held up a rune, letting the dim light reflect off its surface. He examined it, recognizing the power it held. A shockwave rune from a needle snake. Not a bad reward. He slipped it into his pocket. It would be useful, but only if he had a magic rune to activate it. Tai-sung watched, clearly impressed. That rune must be valuable, considering the size of that viper. His voice carried a hint of envy. You planning to use it? Hansu shook his head. No point. His skill limit was 7, and this was not something that fit his style. He preferred abilities that were unconventional. Before he could pocket it fully, Sangjin suddenly stepped in, eyes glinting with interest. Then give it to me. Tai-sung drove his elbow into the guy's chest and warned him not to even think about using it. He would not be able to anyway. Instead, he demanded the hero hand it over to him. Sangjin rubbed his sore chin and pointed out that Tun was already there. Annoyed, the blonde turned to him. You really think you'll be useful with this? Have you already forgotten your mistakes? Sangjin lowered his gaze, embarrassed. He muttered that with a powerful rune, he could match, even surpass, him. Tai-sung immediately shot back, rejecting the idea. He stepped in, trying to calm things down. Hansu, irritated by their argument, finally spoke up. What are you two doing? He raised his hand, revealing the rune. Did I ever say I was giving it to either of you? If I'm parting with this, I'd rather sell it. If you want it, fine. I'll even give you a 5% discount. He smirked. Make me an offer. The 3 were stunned. Tai-sung hesitantly asked if they could pay in installments. Hansa shrugged. If someone's willing to vouch for you, sure. You can guarantee it for each other. He turned away for a moment before stepping forward. I'll take it, she said, placing a hand on her chest. That was expected. None of them trusted each other, leaving her as the only reasonable option. Hansa handed her the rune. Earlier, he had noticed her quietly picking up a rune of magic. She hadn't needed to hide it. After all, she was the one who had taken down the monster. But it was not surprising. In a world like this, the more cards you kept hidden, the better. As the rune exchanged hands, Hansu observed He more closely. She was far more ambitious than she let on. She turned to him. There are 3 runes for agility and perception, and 7 for strength and endurance. Hansa nodded. I'll take 6 strength runes, with a discount, of course. He smiled, thanking the hero. You're generous. Then, he turned back to the others. Don't take this the wrong way, but if you get used to getting things for free in a place like this, you won't last long. Nothing comes without a price. His gaze fell on the rune in his hand, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had to move. As they walked, Hansu's eyes landed on a cluster of Zeuterium deposits. He approached the strange growths and broke off a piece for himself. The others watched him closely, trying to figure out if he was using his ability again. He and Sangjin flanked him, observing his every move. Hansa suddenly straightened and stepped back. Without a word, he drew a knife and turned his attention to the massive snake they had taken down. And Sangjin watched, mesmerized by what he was doing, while Tai-sung, confused, asked what the two were staring at. Hansa didn't answer. With precise movements, he sliced open the snake's body. Its organs spilled onto the ground. Tai-sung watched the hero in confusion as he pulled out the pot once again. Someone asked if he was planning to make another poison, but this time, it was something different. Hansa gathered the materials, scaled from the needle snake. They were tough, but not strong enough to be used as weapons on their own. That meant he had to create one himself. There were 134 possible weapon combinations using monster materials from the training area, but only 11 were practical for actual combat. The needle had limited range, making it difficult to inflict lasting damage like bleeding. However, if he targeted weak points precisely, he could turn that flaw into an advantage. He examined the needle. The tip was slightly dull, but since it was handmade, there was no other choice. Sweat dripped down his face as he combined the ingredients. A bright light flared, signaling the fusion process. The hero knew how much effort alchemists put into discovering the best weapon combinations, especially early on. It had taken them countless hours, but the result was worth it. He sharpened the blade, reinforced it for better armor penetration, and made a few modifications to ensure it could pierce the monster he needed to defeat next. Finally, he wrapped the handle in leather and took a step back, assessing the finished product. Now this looks like a real weapon. As he stood, Tai-sung stared at him intently. If you had used a cocoa lizard instead, you could have made something even better, he commented. But the needle snake isn't bad either. Honestly, I doubt you'll find anything stronger than this for now. He eyed the sword, clearly impressed. Then, after a moment of hesitation, he spoke again. Can I buy that from you? I'll give you all my runes for it. He could tell how much effort the hero had put into making the weapon. Based on that alone, he was certain it was better than anything he had. Hansa considered it for a moment before replying. This isn't just any weapon. But since you're that interested, I'll sell it. Then he added, I can't make another one. I'm out of materials. Tai-sung clicked his tongue in irritation. Selfish, he muttered, running a hand through his hair as Hansa packed up his things. Hansu, unfazed, simply thought ahead. There's something better waiting for me. I just have to be patient. His eyes drifted toward the glowing doors ahead. That had to be their next destination. The carriage doors opened. Inside, there was electricity and an empty space. Their ever-confident Mr. I can do anything had gone quiet. That could only mean one thing. There would not be any fights this time. Which meant a reward was waiting for them. As the group stepped into the carriage, the hero frowned and asked why they were even getting in. Need to get out. Irritation flashed across his face as he turned to them again. I said, this carriage is for one person. Get out. He calmly took a seat, making it clear the conversation was over. Sangjin furrowed his brows. You're mistaken, right? There's plenty of space in here. How could it only be for one person? He ran a hand through his hair in disbelief. Tai-sung threw up his hands. And what rule says you're the only one who gets to go? After everything we've been through together, why do you get to decide? Hansa let out a long sigh, exasperated. Tai-sung clenched his fists. If it weren't for us, you would not have even made it here. Hansa scanned their faces, unimpressed. Pathetic. He understood why they wanted to take this opportunity. But they were missing one crucial thing. He stood up, his expression unreadable. You're right. There's no rule saying I have to be the only one. Then, with a loud clang, he slammed his sword against the floor. Because there are no rules in this world. He gestured toward the exit. So, you can either leave now, or stay here and argue with me. Then, turning to Tai-sung, he pointed the needle at him with a smirk. If you want, go find a lawyer and try to file a complaint against me. His grin turned sharp, almost mocking. Now, make your choice. Tai-sung's jaw tightened as fear crept into his eyes. He hesitated, his mind racing. The train pulled away, leaving the three of them behind at the station. Tai-sung clenched his teeth, testing their strength. A string of curses left his mouth as he glared in the direction the hero had gone. His thoughts swirled. Was that guy really serious? He looked around, taking in his companion's uneasy expressions. He acts like he's in his 40s, but everything he does is absolute madness. A thought crossed his mind. If the three of us attacked him together, we might stand a chance. If we won, we'd get all his items. His fingers twitched toward the handle of his knife. And if we lost, we could just beg for forgiveness. He would not actually kill us, right? It was worth considering. Then, he recalled the hero's cold gaze, the sheer presence that made him freeze in place. His body refused to move. A shiver ran down his spine as realization sank in. No, he would not hesitate. He'd kill me on the spot. With a deep breath, he forced himself to relax. As they parted ways, he muttered, we'll see each other again. Beside him, Mi absent-mindedly stroked her hand. We shouldn't have pushed him so hard, she said quietly. She adjusted her hair and sighed. And we definitely shouldn't have provoked him. He's been helping us all this time. Then, without looking back, she turned toward the exit. Let's go. Tai-sung stared ahead in silence, his thoughts firm. There was nothing wrong with wanting to grow stronger. If anything, it was necessary. The man before him was consumed by negativity. But was not that the whole point of coming here? To push past limits? Tai-sung resolved to strengthen himself no matter what. Piecing together everything he had learned so far, the structure of this place became clear. First, the train made stops at 20 stations. Second, each stop held a random artifact. Third, there was no turning back. Once a station was passed, it was gone for good. Hansa sat with his hands folded, deep in thought. The entire system seemed designed to create psychological pressure. Even if he made it to the final stop, survival was not guaranteed. Caution was essential. When he opened his eyes, he had already arrived at the 12th station. A quick inventory check: Laroon circlet, kettle claws, steel glove. 8 weapons in total. Decent for a beginner, but not particularly useful to him. The Laroon circlet, combined with perception stats, could pinpoint monster weak spots, but Hansa no longer needed it. He already knew them all by heart. He stepped onto the platform, his mind shifting to a different priority: mobility. If he could find an artifact that enhanced movement, his combat efficiency would skyrocket. That was his focus now. Then, he saw it. His eyes widened. Resting atop the monument was the Cloud Maniac's neck. He hadn't expected to find something like this here. One drag from it would instantly boost all stats, and as long as he kept smoking, the effect would continue to grow. A single cigarette granted a 20% stat increase for 10 minutes. A smirk crossed Hansu's lips. This was exactly what he needed. It would not work outside the training area, but within these limits, it was an unmatched artifact. He picked it up, murmuring that it had been a long time since he last saw cigarettes. A memory surfaced. Someone had once scolded him for smoking. Again? "You're aging faster than you think," she had said, taking the pack from his hands. She had smiled, warning him that he'd ruin his face if he kept at it. Lowering his hand, Hansa silently reassured her. This time, it was different. The train doors slid open, pulling him back to the present. He returned to the Snake's Court core, scanning his surroundings. Were they really gone? He had 4 days before another hidden artifact would appear. In the next 2 days, he had to make a decision: focus on hunting and collecting runes or complete the remaining tasks. The choice was obvious. His gaze landed on a pot. He had completed a few tasks on the journey, so why not see what rewards awaited him? Slipping it into his backpack, he made a mental note. He didn't know what he'd get, but some rewards were worth the effort. One particular task caught his eye. The reward was promising, and it would not take long to complete. If he succeeded, he could obtain a Sage Stone, along with a clumsy mage as a follower. Hansa rubbed his chin, thinking. The Sage Stone was a powerful artifact, one that boosted all stats by 10, including its own, and could heal fatal wounds. A rare find, not just in the training zone but even in the red zones. However, the kind of person who completed this quest had to be unhinged, and he knew exactly who had done it before. Envy, a member of the Death Squad. She had been thrown into the abyss alongside criminals while volunteering at the prison. At first, she had her most trusted people with her, but once the training began, they turned on her. Betrayed and enraged, she unleashed her full strength. For 7 days, she hunted them down, tore them apart, and ate their hearts. In the end, she had wanted to take her own life, but then, this quest had appeared. Hansu exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This quest was not for him. It clashed with his goal, saving as many people as possible. He decided to let it go. A different thought came to mind. It should be nighttime by now, which meant it was time for a quest with a solid reward. He recalled one that involved getting food from a selfish, wealthy man. Not a bad deal. Moving forward, he focused on his priorities, completing the quest and managing his stamina. There would be no time to rest. He entered a looted store, hoping to find something to eat. The shelves were stripped bare. As he moved further in, he noticed a hole dug into the floor. He muttered that his so-called companions were nothing but scoundrels. Tossing his backpack over his shoulder, he glanced up at the sky. The moon would be rising soon, and they had the audacity to pull something like this. He smirked. Let's see how brave they really are. The sun had set over the ruined city. In the dim light, people in jackets were unloading boxes while a group of survivors watched from behind cover. Someone whispered, frustrated, "How can they just take everything?" A girl clenched her fists. "We have to stop them." A blonde-haired guy hissed back. "We don't have time for that. The second they hear us, they'll run. I didn't even get a chance to grab anything. They even took my cash." He shook his head. How did they move so fast? From behind a stone, another survivor peeked out nervously. "They might be stronger than us." "Usually quiet," murmured. "There's too many of them. They outnumber us, even if our stats are higher." Someone else muttered. "Hansu isn't back yet. We shouldn't take risks." The blonde girl gave her boyfriend a stunned look. Since when does Sangho talk this much? Meanwhile, across the way, a man named Sango waved at them with a smirk. The entire group tensed, stepping back. The blonde narrowed her eyes. "Is he waving at us?" Tai-sung scoffed. "They're just trying to provoke us. Ignore them. There's no point in taking the bait." He turned and started walking deeper into the alley. "Let's go. We need to find food and supplies somewhere else." The others hesitated, watching him with uncertainty. The blonde girl still didn't understand why that guy had waved, but regardless, he had done his job well. Suddenly, someone emerged from the alley. Sangho squinted, trying to make out who it was. Before he could react, Tai-sung spoke up casually, saying the group needed food. He suggested checking the subway, flashing a smile as he added that they should grab supplies before anyone else got there. Offering to show them the way, he seemed confident. "CHP 11 done." The blonde, however, was not convinced. If Hansa had to fight those guys for food, it would not be an easy battle. They were too many. Maybe asking for help was the better option. Sang-ho grinned. And why should we trust you? He accused the blonde of trying to manipulate them into fighting. Taesung's patience snapped. He stormed up to him. Do you even understand the situation we're in? Sang-ho bristled in anger. But before he could respond, bam, a fist slammed into his face. He hit the ground hard, yelling in pain as blood trickled from his nose. The attacker smirked. Why would I need to set a trap for weaklings like you? Sang-ho gawked at the cocky blonde, stunned. Taesung stepped back, unfazed. I'm giving you a chance. Think about it. Meanwhile, the group of heroes had taken shelter inside a building. The door creaked open, and the girl gasped as she saw Hansu walking toward them. Her cheeks flushed. He had only just returned, but she already felt relieved. Taesung smiled to himself, satisfied. No need to be nervous. No one knew he had orchestrated this, and even if he was caught, he'd find a way to slip out of trouble. Hansu entered the building. The girl quickly explained the situation. People had looted the convenience store. Hansu nodded. I saw them on the way here. He walked over to the table. How much food do we have left? A small handful of supplies sat in front of him. We tried to gather as much as possible. Someone started, but Taesung interrupted with a slight smirk. Things happen, but now that you're here, do you think we can get everything back? One of the guys shifted uncomfortably, swaying slightly. It won't be easy, but I can help. Hansu, unfazed, pulled out a chair and sat down. Let's eat first. A vein twitched on the blonde's forehead. Did Hansu just snort at them? Frustrated, he loomed over Hansu. This does not feel right. His smile turned nervous. Do you really have no shame at all? Hansu shot an irritated look at the hero, but the blonde stepped in, arguing that they had risked their lives for this food. So why shouldn't they ask for something in return? Turning to the hero, he demanded a trade. If the hero had something valuable, then maybe, just maybe, he'd consider sharing. Then, with a smug grin, he casually mentioned that the food was gathered for everyone. Taesung raised a hand in disbelief. Were they really just going to give it away for free? He reminded them again. This food came at a cost. Their lives were on the line for it. With a smirk, he added that even among friends, fairness was important. Meanwhile, Hansu, who hadn't lifted a finger in the struggle, chimed in. Nothing comes for free, he said bluntly. The pair in blue jackets nodded in agreement. Taesung saw an opportunity. If he could rally everyone to his side, the hero would be outnumbered. He glanced at the hero, who remained silent and brooding. With a sarcastic sigh, Hansu scoffed. Too bad, he muttered. Then he turned to the hero and pressed him. If he had nothing to offer, what was he planning to do? Taesung's grin widened. Come on, you must have found something useful in there, he pressed. The blonde eyed the hero expectantly. Taesung made his move, pointing out that the hero had just walked out of a hidden area. Surely he had something worth sharing. Right? He added, feigning innocence. Taesung chuckled and tossed the hero a chocolate bar. No need to drag this out, he said smoothly. Let's be reasonable. Hansu stared at him, silent. He let out a deep sigh. Looks like you've learned your lesson, he said. The guy frowned. What are you even talking about? Just answer me already. The hero abruptly stood up. This guy needs to be more subtle. Then again, it was not surprising. Everyone was just looking out for themselves. Taesung watched the hero, confused by his sudden change in demeanor. But the hero's mind was elsewhere. He never brought these people along because he needed them. He didn't even care about their runes. Hansu turned sharply as the blonde called after the hero in frustration. Where do you think you're going? The hero remained quiet, thinking back to the reason he had come here in the first place. He had done everything he could. His gaze dropped, remembering the furious Kang Tai, who had once sworn vengeance on his enemies. How could someone say something like that so easily? Shame crept in. Without another word, the hero pushed open the door. Take care of yourselves, he said. Save your strength for what's ahead. Then he left. He and Sangjin remained tense and silent, the air between them heavy. The blonde stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. She reminded everyone that they'd managed just fine until now. There was no need to make things worse. With a determined look, she turned to her friend and suggested they go after the hero and bring him back. Taesung ran a hand through his hair, unimpressed. If he wants to leave, let him. Why should we stop him? Hansu silently stepped outside. The blonde mentally scoffed, wishing he'd just disappear already, arrogant until the bitter end. He glanced at the girls following after the hero and smirked. Putting on a show, huh? If you give him anything for free, he'll come crawling back sooner or later, he sneered. Then he turned to Mihe. We don't need that idiot. We can handle things just fine on our own. Mihe hesitated, her body frozen in place as Taesung kept pressing her. But then, suddenly, she bolted out the door. Catching up to the hero, she looked at him desperately. Can I come with you? She asked. His gaze was cold. I can't take you, he answered firmly. She reached out to him, her voice trembling. But didn't you say? He looked away. People make their own choices, he said. For a moment, her face lit up, a a soft smile forming as her cheeks flushed. But before she could respond, the blonde's voice rang out. You can't leave. She turned toward Tai-sung, who glared at her with barely contained anger. You didn't even get your runes, he spat. Maybe he gave you his, but definitely not Sangjin's. No one is leaving, especially not you. Before she could react, Sangjin stepped up from behind. It's fine, he said calmly. Tai-sung's eyes narrowed as Sangjin moved closer. I'm going with them, he added. A laugh erupted from Tai-sung as he clapped Sangjin on the shoulder. You sure about that? Do you even get what you're saying? Sangjin's expression darkened. You really think your father's gonna let this slide? Tai-sung jeered. He clapped him on the shoulder again, harder this time. You pick up some stray dog and now you think you can just walk away. His voice dropped, laced with mockery. Don't tell me you've forgotten who your master is. Sangjin clenched his jaw and adjusted his headphones. And what exactly are you gonna do about it? He shot back. You can't even step outside without a problem now. No one even knows I'm alive. So tell me, Tai-sung, how are you going to explain anything to my father? Tai-sung stared at him, momentarily stunned. It does not matter anymore. Sangjin continued, his voice firm. He shot a sharp glare at the blonde. I don't have to listen to you anymore. Tai-sung's eyes widened. Even after everything, after all he had done to break him, Sangjin was still walking away. You think things will be different out there, he shouted after them. We have all the food. You'll be back sooner or later. His fist clenched as he watched them disappear into the night. But the three of them didn't look back. They kept walking, their figures fading into the city's darkness. Sangjin glanced at the girl, his expression filled with concern. We don't have that many supplies left, he murmured. Hansa walked over to a jacket hanging nearby, hesitating for a moment before slipping it on. Does not matter, he muttered. The boy and girl exchanged confused looks. Adjusting his new jacket awkwardly, Hansa shrugged. We still have things to take care of. His gaze shifted to the hero, puzzled by his silence. What is he even thinking? He watched him closely. The hero had the strength to do anything, so why was he just standing there? If Hansa got into trouble, everything would be pointless. Hansa observed him in return, easily guessing what was on his mind. Not surprising, considering he does not know about the moon. With a sudden grin, Hansa spun around. It's almost midnight, he said casually. Yo am I? He turned to him, confused. A chill ran down her spine. Slowly, she pointed to the sky. Something's wrong with the moon. Above them, the moon pulsed with an eerie glow, its surface swelling unnaturally. Then, without warning, it split open, revealing a massive, cosmic eye staring down at the city. Yo am I's breath hitched. She stared in disbelief, trying to process what she was seeing. Her gaze dropped to Sangjin's hands. His chocolate bar was crumbling into dust. What? His voice wavered as he stared at it in horror. The chocolate disintegrated completely, slipping between his fingers like sand. Frantic, he reached into his backpack. No, it couldn't be. But when he pulled his hand back out, all he found was sand. His heart pounded. This can't be real. A faint glow flickered ahead. His eyes darted up. Silhouettes of people, everywhere. On the streets, rooftops, scattered across the entire city. They stood, eerily visible against the night, their glowing forms cutting through the darkness. A chill spread through him. Are we glowing too? Panic crept into Yo Mi's voice. This means people can see each other, even through walls. She whispered. This is insane. It's forcing people to fight. Sangjin turned to the hero, his voice shaking. Did you know this would happen? Hansa let out a short laugh. Don't be ridiculous, he scoffed. I might have powers, but even I couldn't predict something like this. His way too calm. Suddenly, a chorus of screams tore through the night. People were shouting, accusing each other of stealing their supplies. Then, chaos erupted. From the glowing figures, it was obvious, fights were breaking out everywhere. And it was only getting worse. Hansa watched the people argue over food, his gaze distant and uninterested. With a sigh, he muttered to himself about how terrible this world had become. He looked up at the sky, reminding himself why he had warned them not to take too much. The moment the moon appeared, the strange celestial body unique to this world, all food would vanish without a trace. As Hansa turned to leave, Sangjin called out, asking where he was going. Hansa replied in his usual calm tone, saying he had things to take care of. Meanwhile, inside the building, the remaining group watched in shock as their supplies crumbled into sand. Tai-sung, in disbelief, stated that all their food was completely gone. A frightened girl panicked, wondering what they should do now. Should they search for more? Her boyfriend, staring blankly ahead, pointed out that most of the stores had likely been picked clean. Tai-sung leaned on the table, deep in thought. His mind raced, recalling how Hansa had known everything from the start. He clenched his fists, frustration bubbling under the surface. Did Hansa set them up? Did he want to see them suffer? Cursing the so-called hero's abilities, Tai-sung seethed in silence. Near the window, a blonde girl froze. Outside, glowing figures wandered through the darkened streets, restless, searching. Sung-ho and his men were on the move, hunting down Tai-sung for deceiving them. One of the gang members growled, demanding to know how that coward dared to trick them. Tai-sung peeked out cautiously, heart pounding. If they were caught now, they would not stand a chance. Should they flee? Or wait for the group to separate and attack when they were weaker? The blonde turned to Tai-sung, suggesting they go find Hansu instead. Tai-sung scoffed, jabbing a finger at her face. That bastard, the one who abandoned us and begged for help. He sneered. Have some self-respect. She snapped back, asking what he planned to do. Do you really think we can handle this alone? She yelled. Just sitting here won't change anything. Frustrated, she shoved her boyfriend's arm. Think, if we don't find them first, they'll go after Hansu. If we offer to help him, maybe we stand a chance. Her boyfriend chuckled. If they outnumber us, fighting isn't an option. But maybe we can negotiate something. Tai-sung turned away, irritated but knowing they had a point. A temporary alliance was not ideal. But the idea of putting Hansu in his debt was tempting. With a smirk, he admitted they were right. Fine, let's go. Tai-sung glanced at the street. If we move quietly, they won't notice us. I know where to go. Just follow me. But before they could move, something oozed over his feet. Green slime spread up his legs, pulling him down. He struggled, clawing at the substance, his voice rising in panic. Help me! Pull me out! A voice interrupted. Are you sure you want to bring him along? The leader of the gang, draped in his usual jacket, approached with a calm demeanor. He observed the struggling Tai-sung with amusement. I doubt any of you are getting away. He took a step forward. Come on over. Let's have a little chat. Fear shot through the couple. Without hesitation, they turned and ran, leaving Tai-sung behind, his screams echoing after them. The gang leader crouched beside him, tilting his head. Such rude words for someone so young, he mused. That, my friend, is Orin's duct tape. While you were busy scheming, we weren't exactly sitting around either. He sighed, almost disappointed. Things are so much less entertaining when there's no challenge. Straightening up, he glanced around. Enough talk. There are only 3 of you. Where are the others? Tai-sung remained tense and silent, but the man in front of him didn't hesitate. He swung his leg. Pain exploded through Tae-Seung-ji's body as blood splattered onto the ground. A scream tore from his throat, his leg now badly wounded. Tai-sung, panicked, threw up his hands. I'll tell you everything. Anything you want to know, I'll talk. He stammered, promising to reveal where the others had gone. The boss turned to Sang-ho. Good. At least he understands his position. He smirked before adding. But first, someone wants to have a word with him. Sang-ho's grin widened. The boss suggested they settle this before moving forward, and Sang-ho eagerly stepped closer. Looming over the injured Tai-sung, he taunted. How's that leg? Feels pretty bad. But I won't feel better until I return the favor. Tai-sung gritted his teeth, cursing the so-called friends who had left him behind. The boss gave a casual nod. Just don't overdo it. Sang-ho laughed, motioning to his men. You heard him. Don't go too far. A moment later, Tai-sung was on the ground, blows landing relentlessly. He shielded himself as best he could, watching through blurry vision as the couple vanished into the distance. He couldn't believe they had abandoned him so easily. His mind burned with fury. I'll kill them all. Meanwhile, the couple hurried forward, unsure of where they were headed. Then, in the middle of nowhere, they spotted something unexpected, a pot of meat soup bubbling over a fire. Hansu and his group sat around it, eating in silence. The couple stopped, staring at the scene. What are you guys doing? The man asked. They glanced at the steaming broth. Is this a picnic? The blonde suddenly realized what was happening. Her lips twisted into a bitter smile. He knew. Hansa had known about the food situation all along. She took a step forward, but before she could get too close, Hansa stood up. Without hesitation, he raised his sword and flicked it toward her face. She froze. The blade hovered inches away. Mouth still full, Hansa spoke through bites. Don't come any closer. He turned his back on them, uninterested. The couple bristled. What's with this childish act? The man demanded. The blonde snapped. What did we ever do to you? This was all Tae-Seung-ji's fault. The man narrowed his eyes. What happens if we step forward anyway? Hansa smirked. Then my ability says things won't end well for you. The man scoffed. Oh yeah? Does this ability of yours tell you everything? Lowering his sword slightly, Hansa responded. It tells me enough. Like the fact that you just led danger straight to us. The couple spun around in alarm. From the darkness, a voice chuckled. You're pretty sharp, hero. A squad of men in jackets emerged, their boss wearing a slight smile. Hansa watched them silently. The blonde trembled, sweat dripping down her face. Hansu's mind drifted to the strange rules of this world. He pictured a bag of food, one held by a selfish, wealthy person. The conditions to claim it were simple. Cook and eat as much as possible while the moon was in the sky. It sounded easy, but there was a catch. Beside the fire, freshly sliced meat lay on a wooden board. Only the person who ate the most, without sharing a single bite, would be granted the reward. In a world where people fought tooth and nail for scraps, the task's cruel humor was evident. Those who refused to share would win, and those who did would lose everything. Hansa casually stuck his knife into the soup, pulling out a piece of meat and bringing it to his mouth. Even with all eyes on him, he remained calm. This was not the time to show hesitation. Footsteps approached. The jacketed gang members dragged in the battered Tai-sung, his body covered in fresh bruises. The blonde gasped, "Are you okay?" But Tai-sung cut her off with a furious scream. "Shut up!" His glare burned with rage. "Why did you leave me?" The couple shrank back in fear. The blonde stammered. "We ran to get help." Tai-sung scoffed. "Help? Don't give me that crap. If it weren't for you two, I would have." Watching from the side, clicked his tongue. "Calm down." The gang boss stepped forward, giving Tai-sung a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Relax a little," he said with a smile, then turned to Hansu. "Nice to see you again." His eyes swept over the scene. "You've got some skills, I'll give you that." He gestured toward the pot. "But tell me, where'd you get that meat?" Hansa didn't even look up. He simply pointed at the scattered remains around them. "Meat's everywhere. Why ask me?" He scooped another bite. "I don't need to explain what it looks like, do I?" The gang members exchanged confused glances. They had forced prisoners to eat this meat before. Those poor souls had suffered extreme dehydration and poisoning. But Hansu? He was eating it like it was nothing. The boss stepped in closer, eyes narrowing. "So, you figured out how to cook it safely." Hansu swallowed and replied flatly. "Boil it in goblin blood, and it's fine. Try it yourself." For the first time, the boss hesitated. He knew Hansu had some kind of special ability. Tai-sung had mentioned it before, and he also knew Hansu had gotten something valuable back at the station. A thought crossed his mind. This is the perfect chance. No matter how skilled Hansu was, he was still just a 20-year-old civilian. Against a group like theirs, the difference in experience would matter. The boss smirked. He's used to fighting monsters, but that does not mean he knows how to fight people. Tai-sung, standing nearby, glanced nervously between them. What are you waiting for?" The boss grinned, tilting his head. "Relax. We're just going to grab a bite to eat and have a friendly chat." Tai-sung scowled, clearly annoyed. He hated being ordered around, but he was not dumb enough to act out in front of an entire group. Hansa rose to his feet, his gaze steady. He watched him, fear creeping into her expression. Tai-sung stepped forward, forcing a smirk. "Let's talk." Before he could take another step, he screamed. Don't cross that line." Tai-sung clenched his fists, telling everyone to shut up and wait. Hansa slowly raised his sword, declaring that this was the end. In his mind, he asked her not to blame him for what was about to happen. Tai-sung looked at the hero in confusion, only to be struck down. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground, trembling. Panic set in as he stared at his severed limbs, his breath hitching. A blood-curdling scream erupted from him as he clutched the stumps. The jackets recoiled in shock, the couple among them instinctively jumping back. Tai-sung howled in agony, demanding to know how the hero could call himself human after doing something like this. How could he be so ruthless? Regret and fear filled his eyes as they shut tightly. But his screams didn't stop. "All this, just for a piece of meat," he cried out. Sang-jin's mouth fell open, sweat beading on his forehead. The blonde turned to the group and warned them to tread carefully around the hero. If he was willing to do this just to avoid sharing food, what would he do when he got even stronger? Did they really believe he would not eventually turn against them? Tai-sung whipped his head toward the jackets, shouting that the hero would kill them all for the runes. They had to act now. If they didn't stop him, he would come for them next. Kill him now. Or do you really think you can take him on when he's stronger? The boss's expression darkened. "Get ready," he ordered. Sang-ho hesitated, watching the hero closely. He couldn't argue that the guy was wrong, but there was something unsettling about him. Right now, he was not looking for a fight, but if he gained enough power, he could wipe them all out without effort. The group drew their knives. Under the moonlight, there was no way for the hero to escape. Sang-ho knew this was their best chance. If they wanted to survive, they had to eliminate him now. Hansa met their stares with an icy gaze. Sang-ho tried to wrap his head around it. What kind of student had eyes like that? What had he been through? Hansu exhaled, glancing at the crowd. A memory surfaced. Ayers and Keldien used to argue constantly, even after deciding to work together. Ayers always warned him not to make unnecessary enemies. But Keldien had a different philosophy. If an enemy stands before you, crush them completely, because if you don't, you'll be the one crushed. Hansu smirked. He looked down at his hand, runes glowing faintly against his skin. With a grin, he pulled them out. The jackets shouted in alarm. "What kind of trick is this?" Sang-ho barked an order. "Kill him." The men charged. Hansa gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. If they wanted to start this, then before the night was over, he would finish it. He pushed off the ground, landing on his toes before launching himself toward them. His movements were so fast that Sang-ho winced, unable to comprehend how he was moving like that. Hansa spoke calmly. "This will hurt." Without hesitation, he struck the first enemy, then charged into the crowd, knocking them aside like ragdolls. Pain groans filled the air as bodies hit the ground. The boss stood frozen, his eyes darting around the battlefield. Had the hero absorbed all the hidden runes? If this continued, panic seized him. Don't run, he screamed at his men. We outnumber him. Use it to your advantage. But before he could finish, Hansu was suddenly in front of him. His grip tightened on his knife as he raised it, his voice shaking. You think I'll back down? Hansu stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Think about it. The boss let out a nervous laugh. Do you really believe you'll be fine after taking a life? Killing a human isn't the same as killing monsters. Hansu kept advancing. The man's expression twisted in fear. He screamed, accusing Hansu of murder, his voice growing louder and more desperate. You're just a kid. Do you even understand what you're doing? A blade swung. The boss froze. Hansu walked past him, his sword dripping crimson. Blood gushed from the man's stomach as he collapsed, his breath shallow. Around them, wounded and lifeless jackets lay sprawled on the pavement, groaning in pain. Another bandit fell. The rest of the group looked on in terror. Hansu didn't stop. He drove his sword into another man's back without hesitation. His gaze flicked toward the remaining couple. They're still here, he noted with a smirk. Does that mean they want to fight? The couple exchanged frantic glances, then bolted. Hansu flicked the blood off his sword, sheathed it, and walked toward the abandoned meat. He crouched down, blew on it, then took a bite. Chewing leisurely, he glanced at his companions. What's with those faces? No one answered. He looked away, confused. Everything's fine. Then, stretching his legs, he sat comfortably on the ground. Sangjin remained silent, struggling to process the scene before him. The bodies, the blood, the quiet stillness of dawn breaking over the city. Above them, the moon, having witnessed the night slaughter, slowly closed its eye. Hansu stood up, slinging a bag over his shoulder. He had eaten nearly 3 days' worth of food in one sitting, his stomach turning from the excess. He stared ahead, expression dark. Every task that focused on people, he had failed. But it had been worth it. His fingers tightened around the bag. The fairy's voice echoed in his mind. The bag protects food from the moonlight's gaze. Anything placed inside it exists in subspace. Hansu knew its true capacity. Despite looking small, it could hold nearly 2 weeks' worth of supplies. Behind him, the couple hesitated. Are you sure this is okay? One of them asked, concern in their voice. Hansu turned slightly. You didn't kill us, the girl stammered, eyes filled with uncertainty. He didn't respond right away. Then, with a small sigh, he smiled. Who's the scary one here? She blushed, flustered. I am not scary. I was just worried about you. Hansu chuckled, turning away. The girl watched his back, her thoughts swirling. In the end, it was not surprising he let them live. There was nothing they could do to stop him anyway. And soon, he would only grow stronger. He stepped forward, pushing away thoughts of the others. If Hansu had killed them, he would have taken their runes and gained even more power. Her gaze dropped to the pouch at his waist. She exhaled. In this world, only one truth mattered. You either rise, or you fall. And judging by how Hansu saw things, she realized she fit into this new reality just fine. Hansu looked away, his expression grim. He could have done it, killed them all and taken their runes if his only goal was to grow stronger. But that was not why he came back. His purpose was not just power. It was to save as many people as possible, to minimize conflict, to unite forces. The most important thing was establishing rules. And the first of those rules? No killing for runes. Sure, he could have taken their runes. But their worth was not just in their strength. What they could contribute mattered more. The real challenge would be enforcing these rules. If power dictated order, then someone strong had to be the one setting the example. That's why he couldn't let people see him mindlessly killing. A purge was inevitable, but not here. Not now. Too many eyes were watching. Behind him, Sangjin trailed closely, hugging his arm. Hansu figured it would not be long before someone stumbled upon the runes left behind. Then, Sangjin suddenly stopped. I'll stay here, he said. Hansu turned to him. What are you talking about? Sangjin hesitated, scratching his arm awkwardly. I don't think I can keep going. Not with the others. He glanced at the boy, concern flickering across his face. Why? Hansu didn't look back. Do whatever you want, he said flatly. I respect personal choices. Sangjin turned away without another word. She watched him go. Hansu spoke again. Why don't you just do what you really want? He flinched. The hero suddenly turned to her, his sharp gaze locking onto her. She froze. Are you not afraid of me? He asked coldly. He looked away. I am, she admitted. But the image of him standing among the bodies flashed in her mind. She clenched her fists. I just know not to cross that line. She stared at her feet, then gathered her courage and met his eyes. If I leave now, you won't let me come back, will you? Hansu was silent. He took a shaky breath. Then I'll stay. Until the end. The hero studied her for a moment. Good instincts. He smirked. Then let's go. Without another word, they descended into the subway. Some time later, Tai Sung trembled, desperately trying to shove a body off of himself. His hands were slick with blood as he thrashed beneath the weight. Damn jackets, all they do is yap, he spat, voice filled with rage. He should have just killed them all. The hero made a mistake. Taisung's wounds were already closing. Soon, he'd be fully healed. And when that happened, he'd make them all pay. Gritting his teeth, he dragged himself forward, every movement sending sharp pain through his body. But he didn't stop. He would follow the hero. He groaned, panting, dragging himself inch by inch. His anger burned, searing hotter than his wounds. How dare they abandon me? Yo am I he. Yo am I he left him too. His vision blurred with fury. I won't let him get away with this. I won't be left behind. A shadow loomed over him. Combat boots stepped into view. Taisung's body tensed. He slowly lifted his gaze. Sangjin stood over him, staring down in silence. Taisung blinked. Confusion flickered across his face. Then realization. This is my chance. He forced a weak smile. Pick me up, he said. Sangjin didn't move. Taisung's smile faltered. Didn't you hear me? Pick me up. Still, nothing. Sangjin just stood there, looking down at him. His eyes were empty. Something dark lurked beneath them. Taisung's expression twisted. Are you seriously going to leave me here? After everything? Sangjin said nothing. His fingers slowly reached down. Taisung scoffed. What? Trying to look intimidating now. Don't make me laugh. Sangjin grabbed a knife from the ground. Taisung's breath hitched. The blade glinted in the dim light, the metal radiating an unsettling chill. And Sangjin's eyes. They were terrifying. Taisung smirked at the boss while Sangjin silently observed his enemy. Just as Taisung turned away, Sangjin slowly closed the distance between them. Taisung frowned, puzzled by Sangjin's approach. Before he could react, a hand shot out, gripping his collar. Taisung immediately grabbed the man's wrist. What the hell are you doing? He demanded. Sangjin's expression darkened. Now I understand, he muttered. Taisung's mind raced. When had Sangjin become this strong? Sangjin yanked him closer. I should have done this a long time ago, he said, his voice eerily calm. Taisung scowled. What the hell are you talking about? Let me go. But Sangjin's gaze was chilling, his grip unrelenting. In the next instant, Taisung felt a sharp pain beneath his ribs. His pupils shrank. His trembling hand reached for the headphones around his neck as he cursed under his breath. Taisung's voice wavered with rage. How dare you? The headphones slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Sangjin's voice was cold. You told me to know my place. Now it's your turn. A tremor ran through Taisung's body as Sangjin sneered. You think you're someone? All you've ever done is hide behind your father, using him to humiliate me. Sangjin let out a low chuckle as the blooded knife fell from his grasp. He dropped to his knees, covering his mouth, then suddenly struck himself in the face. His breathing was unsteady. Pull yourself together, he muttered. This is nothing. It's nothing. Beneath him lay the fallen runes of the dead. Sangjin stood. The boss reached out a hand. Let's talk, he offered. Spare me, and we can work together. Sangjin was not listening. He turned to the wounded man, whose voice droned on. And then it all made sense. Hansa hadn't followed him. He had known. The man reached toward Sangjin, desperate. Sangjin scoffed. You're pathetic, he said. If you were brave enough to stand beside me in battle instead of cowering in fear, maybe things would have been different. He thought of who? Of his distance. Can I still stay by your side? His fingers closed around Taisung's runes. If he had been stronger, the hero would not have pushed him away. That had never changed. His mind drifted back to the past, to school, where he had walked through life like a minefield, shrinking at every step because of one person. Not anymore. This time, he would prove himself. Sangjin stared ahead, determination burning in his eyes. He would grow stronger, just like the hero. If he had to use fools to catch up, so be it. As he walked forward, leaving a trail of blood behind him, he muttered to himself, one day, he'll see me differently. Above the ruined city, mutated birds circled. One of them let out a piercing screech. On the ground below, He stood firm. Taking a deep breath, she unleashed a powerful scream, shaking the air. The birds around her plummeted to the ground, lifeless. Just as she turned at the sound of rustling wings, she spotted a lone bird still in flight, diving straight at her. A blade flashed in front of her, slicing through the creature before it could reach her. The protagonist stepped forward, flashing a sheepish smile. He exhaled, relieved. Looks like I'll be needing your help again. As she approached the fallen bird, Hansa spoke. Being independent does not mean doing everything alone, he said, handing over the runes. If there are gaps in your skills, it only makes sense to rely on a comrade. Taking the remaining runes, the young man added, try to understand your strengths and weaknesses better. He smiled to herself. He was always strict about distributing resources. Tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, she realized 2 days had already passed since their arrival here. Standing in front of a status window, she had an idea, buying skills from her ally that increased mana and stamina recovery. Without them, catching up to his level would be nearly impossible. She glanced away, feeling slightly embarrassed. She was still struggling not to rely on him. With a deep sigh, she focused on her stats. The reincarnator had raised all his attributes to 42. Scratching the back of his head, he figured maintaining balanced growth was the best approach. There was no need to exchange runes since he lacked strength and stamina anyway. A distant voice broke their thoughts. Survivors, return to the starting position immediately. Latecomers will be punished. The protagonist frowned, clearly displeased. He hesitated, her expression uneasy. Hansa glanced at her. Come on. The two of them made their way through the destroyed city. As they walked, he stole quick glances at him, her cheeks growing warm. Hansa noticed. What's with that look? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Do you have a girlfriend? Hansa flinched, smiling nervously. He immediately regretted asking. Was that too personal? It was not the right thing to ask, but still, her ally had been unusually generous. Hansa looked down, tension flickering across his face. He clenched her shaking hands. She had wanted to ask something else entirely. Glancing to the side, the reincarnator realized she was nervous but speaking honestly. He thought about Kang Tai. He'd probably find this question amusing, even if it was just small talk. An image flashed in his mind. His embarrassed comrade, the unimpressed Keldian, and the exasperated S. At first, He had been too afraid to even speak. She opened her mouth to ask something else, but in the end, she simply looked down and stayed silent. The protagonist introduced his beloved. Though, in truth, they had not yet met. Even so, he couldn't afford to lose her again. He raised an eyebrow, puzzled by his words. I don't remember that, she said. Her friend gave no response. She lowered her head, and the two walked forward in silence. They arrived at a parking lot where the survivors had gathered. He glanced around, recognizing many familiar faces among the crowd. Her eyes widened, something felt off. A fairy beamed, surveying the group. Is everyone here? Nearby, a devil spread his arms and sighed. Unfortunately, we got here too quickly. Wasting no time, the assistant stepped forward. I have 2 pieces of good news for you travelers, he announced. The crowd tensed, eyes filled with dread. Raising a single finger, the monster closed his eyes. First, if you can hold out for 72 more hours, you'll be free to leave. The fairy clapped his hands together. Wonderful news, isn't it? His voice was bright and cheerful. The survivors, however, stood frozen in horror. The devil's gaze darkened. Why aren't you reacting? With their faces pale and eyes wide, the people hesitantly started to clap. The assistant smirked. Ah, that's more like it. I'm glad to see you all so happy. Then, with a snap of his fingers, he declared, Now, it's time to introduce tonight's star. The ground trembled. Pebbles scattered across the pavement. The crowd stiffened as a massive shadow loomed over them. A monstrous altar towered over the ruined city. He's eyes widened in shock. What is that? A massive claw struck the bars of a cage, rattling the structure. The monster inside let out a deep growl. The fairy grinned. A very cute little creature is waiting for you inside. Spreading his wings, the devil gestured grandly. Do you see it? Behind him, an enormous eye opened, unblinking and hungry. The assistant chuckled. This little guy is a carnivorous beast. Gasps filled the air. The fairy continued with a playful lilt. For your sake, we haven't fed it all day. The survivors paled. It's very eager to be let out. The altar walls shook violently. The devil slammed his fist against the barrier. It may look sturdy, but I promise, it's not as strong as you'd hope. A deafening roar split the air. The beast bared its fangs. The assistant tilted his head. Now, tell me, how many of you will survive when it gets out? Someone in the crowd murmured. Do we have to fight that thing? The fairy smirked. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still one more piece of good news. Casually, the devil lay his head on a pillow. There's a way to make it fall asleep. If we do that, it won't even try to break free. Blowing a kiss to the crowd, the assistant teased. Anyone want to guess how? Silence. The survivors' expressions remained grim. The monster scoffed, tossing the pillow aside. You're all such boring actors. Then, baring his fangs, the fairy grinned. The method is very simple. The devil casually declared that feeding the monster 5 people a day was the simplest solution. The girl frowned, while the assistant quickly did the math. 3 feedings would be needed to last 72 hours. Standing before the anxious crowd, the protagonist took a quick count. Only a little over 60 people remained. That meant nearly a quarter of them would have to be sacrificed just to keep the beast asleep. With a snap of his fingers, the fairy reminded them that the choice was theirs to make. Then, to silence any doubts, he played a recording. A massive creature filled the system window, trampling buildings beneath its enormous feet. Its eyes burned with a crazed fire as terrified screams echoed through the air. People tried to flee, but one man was lifted high into the sky before being tossed into the monster's gaping mouth. Hands behind his head, the devil smirked. He explained that the footage was from another training area, one where the survivors had foolishly attempted to fight back. Their fate was clear. Hansa glanced around. The other survivors were already arguing. The assistant sighed and pointed out the obvious. Fighting the monster was a joke, one that would not end well. A man in a red cap hesitantly raised his hand. His voice trembled as he asked how they were supposed to decide who to sacrifice. The fairy tilted his head. Why ask me? He mused, watching the man flinch. The devil explained that it was up to them, whether they picked their victims by force or left it to chance. His gaze darkened. Either way, he added, as long as they are still breathing, it works. The assistant spread his arms. You have 1 hour. Make a decision, and you'll be safe for the next 24 hours. After that, you'll have another hour to choose your next 5. A bright timer appeared on the system window, counting down. The monster watched, waiting for the travelers to make their choice. The survivors stood frozen, uncertainty hanging thick in the air. He turned to her friend. Which choice do you think is better? He closed his eyes. Does it even matter? The outcome is already decided. The man in the hat raised an eyebrow. Let's at least be honest about it. He lifted his hand. We should draw lots to decide the first 5 sacrifices. Someone scoffed. And why should we do that? All eyes turned to the speaker. Fear spread through the crowd. The girl's mouth fell open. Sang-jin frowned. Why be honest? The boy took a step forward, scanning the crowd. Do we even have a reason to be? The man in the hat crossed his arms. Then what's your plan? You can't just reject an idea without offering a better one. The boy smirked and turned away. Sang-jin suggested using the most practical method. Just as the boy placed his hand on a nearby pole, it suddenly snapped in half. A wave of fear rippled through the travelers as the traffic light crashed to the ground with a loud clang. Raising his hand, one of the survivors spoke up. We should start with those who are useless, he said coldly, scanning the crowd for potential sacrifices. The people shrank back in fear. Mihi stared at her former ally in horror. Meanwhile, Sang-jin smirked. He had power now, and everyone was listening to him. He liked it. Spreading his arms, he reminded them that they had no time to waste. Another 100 people had already vanished, and those ahead of them were out of reach. Taking them down one by one would be impossible. The protagonist crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the burning altar that trembled in the distance. The boy stepped forward. We need to stick together, he said. If we end up fighting that monster, we'll need every advantage we can get. The survivor scoffed, gesturing toward a weaker man in the group. Then we shouldn't waste resources on dead weight. Sang-jin frowned. Isn't it only logical to send the weakest into the beast's mouth first? Hansa looked up when they turned to him for his opinion. The heroes stood facing each other, tension thick in the air. The boy thought back to Tis, his past self, and realized he was not the same anymore. He had changed. Looking at his former comrade, he knew he didn't want to make an enemy of him. If he wanted a fresh start, he needed allies. A smirk formed on his lips. Sang-jin was sure his friend would make the right decision. His judgment had always been perfect. Raising his hand, the boy said, That's not a bad method, but I have a better idea. He stroked his chin thoughtfully before continuing. If we follow my plan, no one needs to be sacrificed. The group fell silent. What? Someone blurted out, eyes wide in shock. The man in the hat narrowed his gaze. Are you saying, we should fight that thing together? His voice was laced with disbelief. The recording had already proven that was a death sentence. The monster only grew stronger with every person it devoured. Outnumbering it would not work. The boy shook his head. I never said anything about fighting it. The survivor's expression darkened. Then what do you suggest? His voice wavered with fear. The reincarnator smirked. Simple. I'll fight it alone. A stunned silence followed. Mouths fell open. Sweat beaded on tense faces. It was impossible. No. Insane. The fat man threw up his hands. What nonsense is this? This isn't some goblin horde. Pointing at the boy, he reminded everyone that time was running out. The blue system window displayed the countdown. 49 minutes left. Sang-jin clenched his fist as the others debated their next move. His gaze flickered toward the boy, wondering, had his former comrade truly become strong enough to face that monster alone? The survivor studied the protagonist, waiting for an answer. Hansa rolled his eyes. I want to fight it, but right now, it's not that simple. Sang-jin's expression shifted. Even someone like him needed help in this situation. A grin spread across his face. Then let's do it together. The strongest among us should step forward and fight. The boy scowled. At least let me finish talking first. He pursed his lips, trying to organize his thoughts. The survivor raised a hand. All right then, what's your plan? The young man closed his eyes, considering his options. Meanwhile, a girl glanced at her friend, silently wondering if she'd be included in the plan. But deep down, she already knew the answer. There was no chance. Finally, the reincarnator spoke. If I boost my strength and endurance by 30 points, I can take this thing down one-on-one. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Eyebrows raised in surprise. A woman's eyes widened. Two survivors narrowed their gazes, skeptical. Then, the protagonist made his offer. Give me your stat-boosting runes, and I promise I'll destroy the monster. From the altar, the creature stirred, parting its massive jaws. Hansa placed his hands on his belt, waiting. The travelers hesitated. He needed 60 runes, but who was willing to give theirs up? The boy remained confident. If he used his items and maxed out his stats, he could pull this off. A pack of cigarettes rested in his breast pocket, a familiar reminder of his past battles. He had the experience. He knew this monster's weaknesses, and if he succeeded, he could claim the second hidden treasure. Even seasoned warriors like Keldian and Kangtai had failed to obtain it. Clementine had figured it out, but even the king of berserkers, despite being perfectly suited for the challenge, had barely survived in the end. Clenching his fist, the boy told himself, this time, he had to be faster, stronger. The treasure was at stake. Looking down, he said, I don't care who hands over the runes. Just give me what I need, and I'll head to the altar immediately. Looking down, he said, I don't care who hands over the runes. Just give me what I need, and I'll head to the altar immediately. The timer ticked down. 41 minutes left. The fat man scowled. Wait a second. If these weaklings have that many runes, why aren't they stronger? The survivor spread his arms. Then let's settle this. Everyone, hand over your runes. If we can't agree, we'll draw lots. The tension in the air thickened. Someone scoffed. Selfish bastard. The survivor turned sharply toward the voice. A man stepped forward, his eyes cold. Why should we just hand over our runes to you? If we start with the weakest, you'd be the first one gone. A woman approached, sizing him up. The gap between the strong and the weak was staggering. Smirking, she tilted her head. Or is it just because you don't have that many runes to begin with? Her words hit their mark. The man gritted his teeth, his brows furrowing in frustration. How dare you talk to me like that? Resting her hand on the knife's handle, the stranger warned him not to overstep his bounds, threatening to break every bone in his body and toss him into the altar. Covering his face with one hand, the survivor grasped the reality of the situation. It all came down to strength. He reminded them that elders deserved respect, his voice trembling with fear. Desperate, he asked if they didn't live in a democracy. Clenching her fist, the girl smirked and suggested they vote, since they were in a democracy. After all, her grin widened as she gave her comrade an ultimatum. Hand over the runes and live or refuse and be eaten. The mention of an anonymous vote sent a wave of horror through the crowd. Eyes widened, and a fat man raised his eyebrows in fear. Stepping closer to the young man, someone pointed out that he had the power to take runes from others. The survivor coldly added that killing strong opponents would make it even easier. Anger flared. Someone struck him across the face. A man in a hat grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know if he had a death wish. The fat man, shaking, pleaded that he had to survive. His family was waiting for him. But the crowd had already made up their minds. Voices rose, calling for him to be thrown into the altar. The protagonist checked the timer. Hansu exhaled heavily, watching as chaos unfolded. The travelers had lost control, attacking one another with no thought of stopping. It was clear, he had to intervene. As tensions reached a breaking point, Hansu raised a hand and called for order. The crowd hesitated, turning toward him. Calmly, he laid out their choices, pointing at the others as he explained that they had 5 options. This was how the week would be structured. The fat man's mouth fell open in disbelief. The man in the hat, his face pale, demanded to know if they were seriously considering sacrificing people to the monster. Parents clutched their children tightly. A voice rang out, asking if the weak were really about to be thrown to their deaths. A young man smirked. The timer showed only 30 minutes remaining. He stood before the altar's entrance, frustration clear in her stance. Behind her, a man scoffed, saying she could have joined him if this was how she planned to act. Sangjin approached his former ally, suggesting she had a chance to get closer to the boy. The girl flushed, embarrassed, and shot back, asking if he still hadn't figured out what Hansu was really like. The boy pursed his lips in displeasure. With her hands behind her back, the woman spoke up. She wanted to go with him too. He chuckled, pointing out that she couldn't just follow him around and hide behind him forever. The survivor turned to her. What are you going to do now? She stepped forward, determination in her voice. She was not going to just stand there and wait. Looking back at the crowd, she added that if she did, she'd only earn the scorn of her friends. And that would make her no different from the rest of them. The protagonist glanced at the group and asked what they were doing while others were out there handling the real challenges. The survivors looked up, fear evident in their eyes. Hansu spoke up, his tone firm. It didn't matter how bad their situation was. What mattered was understanding the consequences of their choices. With a serious expression, he explained that the leaders hadn't abandoned them because they were weak. Rather, they simply hadn't been strong enough to keep up. Did they really expect to be taken care of here? The weaklings averted their eyes in guilt. If they wanted to survive, then each of them had to claim 2 runes. Folding his arms, Hansu told them to decide who they would hunt over the next 3 days. They needed to find the runes and settle their debts. Smiling, the reincarnator warned that anyone who tried to escape without paying would regret it. He turned away, remarking that her friend always kept his promises. He could handle things on his own. With a determined look, she decided she needed to pick up the pace and catch up to him. Sangjin, watching her, invited her to join him instead. He assured her that the rest of the team would be glad to have her. The girl flinched at the offer, then smiled warmly, thanking him. She told him she'd give her answer later. Yo am I he turned and walked away. As he watched her leave, the boy didn't need to see her in action to know. She had grown stronger since their last meeting. Her hair fluttered in the wind, and clenching his fist, the survivor knew he had to prove himself. What he had now was not enough. Narrowing his eyes, he resolved to show his worth. A stranger pointed at him, saying they needed to talk. A smirk played on her lips as she raised an eyebrow. Sangjin asked what she wanted. Resting a hand on shoulder, another man chimed in, asking what was bothering her. A man named Suyol extended his hand and introduced himself, explaining that his friend was just shy. Gesturing toward a nearby group, a formally dressed man explained that the leaders of two different teams were about to have a conversation. The boy blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected to be called a leader. He shook Suyol's hand and admitted that his friends were just following him. Suyol chuckled, saying that was exactly what leadership was. Then, as if remembering something, he noted that the survivor knew Hansu. Raising an eyebrow, he suggested they talk about him for a bit, if that was all right. Sangjin smiled nervously but agreed. Inside the altar, a purple portal flickered to life. A dispenser sat on the floor. Goblin poison would not work against a carnivorous beast. Gripping his sword, the protagonist realized he had to use paralyzing poison instead. Slipping on his rosary, he prepared for what was ahead. Hansu considered the effects. It restored stamina and enhanced strength, making it a valuable asset, even if it was only obtained through hunting. Tossing the rosary into his mouth, he decided it would help in the upcoming battle. As he descended the stairs, he assessed his chances. The odds weren't in his favor, but there was no other option. What he had now was not enough to take on this creature. The monster opened its mouth wide, releasing thick steam. Reaching into his pocket, Hansu pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He was going to need plenty of cloud snacks for this fight. He clenched one between his teeth, looking down for a moment. It had been a long time since he had done this. Slipping the pack back into his jacket, he could only hope that he was making the right call. A bright energy flared around him as he looked away. With a decisive frown, he realized that a rune perfectly suited for this world had finally been formed. The once gray rune shimmered, shifting through different colors, a phenomenon that occurred when its stats exceeded 100 units. Colorless turned red, red became orange, and orange shifted to yellow. A status window appeared. According to the inscriptions, cloud snacks boosted stat values by 20%. Although the gap between regular runes and colorless runes at 100% was small, as their level increased, the difference became significant. The monster's eyes gleamed with awareness. This carnivorous beast was not like the monsters released in the first training round. A colorless rune would be necessary to take it down. Stepping forward, Hansa thought that things would move along much faster if he had the essence of a troll. If that were the case, the Berserker King would go mad. Coming to a halt, he recalled that only one person had ever managed to find the hidden treasure. Lightning crackled from his eye. The more impossible a task seemed, the greater the reward in this damned world. The monster turned, sensing his presence. Hansa tightened his grip on his sword and charged. The air above was filled with enormous creatures, each possessing racial skills. This carnivorous beast was born with two of them. It slammed its hand against the ground, shattering it on impact. Hansa remained calm, eyes locked on his opponent. The monster lifted its head, and its gaze burned with a sinister light. Its first skill, intimidation. Hansa narrowed his eyes and raised his sword. The beast lunged forward, its massive hand reaching for him. Claws rushed in to seize his prey. At the last second, Hansa dodged to the side. Jumping back, he recalled the effect of intimidation. It paralyzed its victim with fear, making them easy prey. The creature would then devour them, using carnivory to restore its stamina. Lighting another cigarette, Hansa smirked. Despite everything, his habits hadn't changed. In a way, he was glad that his strength hadn't dulled. The monster's tongue shot out as it let out a deafening scream. Usually, after carnivory, the next skill followed, blood-drinking swamp, a technique that drained every drop of blood from its victim. The beast's red eyes widened, locking onto him. It was time to see who would survive. Hansa swiftly dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the incoming strike. He knew this enemy would be tough to handle. A quick glance told him that reckless attacks would not work, but he had a strategy in mind. Instead of blindly striking, he needed to restrict the creature's movements. Lightning crackled over the body of the carnivorous beast as Hansa halted and turned. The monster lunged, claws swiping toward him. He sidestepped and gripped his sword tightly. Random stabs would not be enough. He had to target its nerves, injecting poison into the joints. With a swift motion, his blade struck, leaving small punctures on the creature's arm. Lightning surged from the sword's tip, and the beast let out a piercing roar. Hansa leaned on his weapon, watching and waiting. The poison needed time to work, 12 minutes, according to the timer. Just then, a brilliant light illuminated the altar. The monster struck again, forcing him to retreat. Dust billowed from the ground as he landed lightly on his feet. The beast snarled, locking eyes with him. But suddenly, its pupils darted wildly. Hansa lit another cigarette and took a slow drag. The monster swung at him again. His unique skill, intimidation, depended on the target's willpower, and against a weaker foe, it could be devastating. A surge of energy flared around him, his magic immunity offering an extra edge. Holding his sword before him, he scoffed. This creature was nothing compared to the real threat ahead. He exhaled smoke and flicked away the spent cigarette. Another attack came, but he dodged effortlessly. Years of experience had honed his instincts, sharpening his awareness in battle. He smirked, recalling KNGTAE's words. Anticipation is the key to survival. Pulling another cigarette from his pocket, he felt a strange sense of amusement. He could now predict every movement of his opponent. The beast twisted its head, attempting another strike. Hansa followed its gaze and instantly knew where it aimed. Looking down, he admitted that the fight was still challenging, but his increased strength and endurance allowed him to react faster. Fighting inside the altar had been a good decision. Plus, he still had time. And snacks. From a tower above, a woman crouched, watching intently. She marveled at the fact that he was fighting alone. Smirking, Seol thought he had to be crazy, or just extremely confident, to take on such a foe so casually. Meanwhile, Sangjin observed from a distance, listening to the others speculate. They believed Hansu had stolen their runes intentionally, not because he needed them, but because he simply didn't care. Turning toward the stairs, Sangjin reminded them why they had come. It was time to do their part. But before they could leave, a voice called out. A boy raised a hand to his mouth and shouted. They were here to help. Hansa turned, surprised. Looking down at the survivor, he hesitated as the boy urged him to wait while they made their way down. The group leader furrowed his brow and asked what was going on. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he reminded them to move quietly. If they made a sound, the monster would notice. Sangjin, however, insisted that their comrade needed to know they were here. Spreading his arms, Seol countered that if the boy knew, the beast would know too. The younger one scratched the back of his head, realizing his mistake. With a nervous chuckle, he admitted he hadn't thought about that. The older man laughed, shaking his head. It happens, he said before turning away and calling his comrade an idiot. The survivor looked back, apologizing. From the altar, Hansa caught the exchange and smirked. His low chuckle carried through the air. The group leader's expression darkened. There was no way they could afford to lose because of someone else's mistake. But in truth, there was no immediate danger. The spiral staircase led downward, where another fierce battle was raging. CHP 19 done. As they descended, Suyol muttered his plan. Once the beast was dealt with, they'd take care of the boy. When the adrenaline wore off, Hansu would not have time to notice them closing in. However, as he observed Hansu's battle, his unease grew. This man was dangerous. Standing in the center of the altar, Hansu's posture was tight, his movements sharp and precise. To the guild leader, he didn't seem like a person. He was more like a predator that remained calm only when fully satisfied. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek as a memory resurfaced. That night, Hansa had fought an entire crowd alone, cutting through them without hesitation. Worse, he looked like he was enjoying it. Suyol clenched his teeth as he climbed further up the stairs. He couldn't allow someone this dangerous to grow even stronger. If Hansu continued to gain power, he'd dominate everyone, including him. Turning back, he ordered his ally to go check on the situation below. Down below, Hansu's battle was shifting. The carnivorous beast was slowing, its attacks growing sluggish. Watching from the staircase, Sangjin's mouth hung open in shock. But then, unexpectedly, he grinned. A woman beside him frowned, sensing something was off. Why'd he go quiet all of a sudden? She muttered. Before anyone could respond, a deafening roar shook the tower. The ground trembled, and the spiral staircase quivered beneath their feet. A massive explosion erupted above them, obliterating the structure. The force sent them flying. In midair, the woman gasped. What the hell? Crashing to the ground, she groaned and struggled to stand. The realization hit her immediately. They had been exposed. However, the monster's movements had become sluggish. It snarled and swung its tail violently. Bracing itself, the beast planted a clawed hand into the ground, its bloodshot eyes flickering with rage. The onlookers clutched their heads as an overwhelming pressure bore down on them, far greater than what they had felt before. Then, the beast's gaze shifted. It had noticed them. The monster's jaws parted, its breath heavy and menacing. Gritting his teeth, Suyol reassured himself that even though their surprise attack had failed, everything would be fine. Hansu was still here. From the staircase, the woman caught sight of him. What are you doing there? She called out. Turning slightly, the man shrugged. Shouldn't we focus on taking this thing down? If we work together, we can handle it. The group leader tensed, worried that their comrade might abandon the fight when they were so close to finishing it. Meanwhile, Hansu, cigarette hanging from his lips, exhaled a thin stream of smoke. His gaze shifted back toward the monster. You idiots just ruined everything, he muttered. Now it's going to recover all its stamina. His ability to dodge the creature's attacks had only been possible because of the cloud snack. But now, things had taken a turn for the worse. The group flinched at his words, their faces tightening with fear. Nearby, Suyol clenched his jaw, fingers twisting the bottle of paralyzing poison in his grip. Hansa watched them for a moment before sighing. If the beast finished dealing with these travelers, continuing the fight would only get more complicated. Hands on his hips, he decided on a new approach. Well then, he said, why don't you all try handling it yourselves? The woman's eyes widened as he turned away. Rushing toward the stairs, she snapped, are you seriously planning to run away? Her brow furrowed in frustration. Your friend is still here. Hansa didn't respond. Glaring, she turned back toward the others. Would he mind if we used his friend as bait? She muttered coldly. Descending a step, Sangjin tilted his head. Who are you looking for? Before she could answer, the boy grinned. Oh, didn't you notice? You all fell down the stairs. Her body stiffened. The realization hit her like a brick. His smug expression, the broken stares. He had overheard everything. And he had done this on purpose. You bastard, she seethed. I'll kill you. Not happening. The survivor cut in, his voice eerily calm. He lowered his gaze. You don't have the time. The monster licked its lips, watching its prey with delight. The travelers stood frozen, trapped under its massive shadow. It relished their fear. Seol's voice broke through the silence. If this thing recovers, we're dead. He gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes. They had no choice but to work with Hansu. There was no other way to survive. We need him, he muttered. Without him, we're done for. Scanning his surroundings, Hansu smirked. There was no longer any need to worry about the stairs. He turned back toward the group. Tell me, he said. Did you all come here just to sacrifice yourselves? The group leader stiffened. What? What are you talking about? Suyol trembled, flashes of a past conversation flooding his mind. The fairy's grin haunted his memory. She had told him the truth. 5 people had to be sacrificed every day. A chilling scream tore through the air. The monster's tongue lashed out, dragging a stunned man into its gaping maw. The others could only watch in horror as the beast's jaws snapped shut. Hansu remained silent, watching the scene unfold. Then, he gave a small nod. Thanks for the noble sacrifice. As the protagonist made his way toward the exit, Hansu called out, demanding to know why he had done it. Squinting slightly, the boy admitted he had already figured out Hansu's intentions and warned him to be more mindful of his words. Lowering his gaze, Sangjin muttered that he had come to a realization. Then, a small smile crept onto his face as he lifted his eyes and declared that he could be useful. Hansu's expression hardened. He told Sangjin to prove it. The young man placed his hands on his hips, looking at him in disbelief. And why would I do that? He asked. Sangjin responded calmly. He knew Hansu's goals were different from others. The reincarnator took a slow drag from his cigarette, eyes shadowed as he regarded his friend. He pointed out that Hansu was always thinking several steps ahead, never hesitating, something that had become clear in the fight against Song and the bandits. Despite their overwhelming victory, the wounded enemies lay scattered across the battlefield, alive. Hansu had chosen not to finish them off, even though it could cause trouble later. His gaze darkened as he recalled the moment when the altar loomed over the city. Hansu had the strength to eliminate every rival, yet he didn't. Instead, he had raised his hand, calling for a truce. Frowning, Hansu's voice sharpened as he questioned the logic behind it. Why spare them? He asked. It's not like you. Sangjin held his gaze in silence before extending his hands. Then stain them with blood instead of me, he offered. The boy then asked Hansu to take him along, to travel together. Closing his eyes, Hansu let out a small smile but said nothing as he walked past. He admitted he had no answer after everything that had happened. Clenching his fists, he justified his past actions. There had been no other choice at the time. That was why he had been caught. But next time would be different. He vowed never to let it happen again. Watching him go, Sangjin made a silent promise. There would always be obstacles in Hansu's path, but he would eliminate those Hansu couldn't, ensuring he could pursue his goal without hesitation. With a stern look, Hansu resolved to follow him, to grow stronger. His gaze remained fixed on his friend's back, willing to do whatever it took to walk beside him and understand his true purpose. Then, as if sensing his thoughts, Hansu suddenly turned around, eyes narrowing. And if circumstances don't allow it, he asked, what if you fall behind? The two locked eyes in heavy silence, as if foreshadowing a trial ahead. A knowing smile tugged at Sangjin's lips. Then I'll become stronger, he promised. And when I do, you'll accept me as an ally. Hansu closed his eyes for a moment before giving his final words. Then leave. The boy froze in shock, unable to comprehend why his friend was still refusing. Desperate, he rushed after him. Just give me one chance, he pleaded. Let me fix my mistakes. Hansu crushed a cigarette under his boot, glancing back. You misunderstood me, he said calmly. Without another word, he turned and continued toward the exit. Just before leaving, he suggested they meet here again tomorrow. Taking out a fresh pack of cigarettes, he added, the monster won't be here by then. Sangjin furrowed his brows. What do you mean? He asked, confused. Hansu didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked down at his cigarettes, then told Sangjin to take the leftover runes from the fallen enemies. With a faint smile, he repeated, "See you tomorrow." Left alone, Sangjin collapsed to his knees, frustration washing over him. The reincarnator remained uncertain about him, but perhaps he could be useful in the future. Just then, S knelt beside him. She reminded him of his past mission, the one that had once mattered above all else. "Your duty was to save humanity," she said. Her long hair covered her eyes as she warned him that many would try to stop him. "For that, you'll need a punisher," she explained, "someone who can act in your place." Surrounded by warriors, the woman in armor continued. Every monarch had a punisher, someone to stain their hands in blood so their master could remain focused on the goal. She raised a dagger before crossing her arms over her chest. Hansa had once considered Andy for that role. Sangjin had already been a punisher in his past life, wielding a glowing rune just as he did now. Despite his doubts, Hansa decided to give him a chance. When the second training began, the survivors would be scattered, dissolving into blue particles and flung to distant places. Hansa knew that when that moment came, his perspective might change. He glanced back with a smirk. If he could secure a punisher with multiple hands and 8 cloud snacks, then it was a worthwhile investment. Turning away, he reminded himself that failure was not an option. His focus now was obtaining the second hidden treasure. Meanwhile, a massive carnivorous beast roared, its chest struck by multiple blows. The conditions for claiming the hidden treasure were simple, but not easy. Hansa leaned on the hilt of his sword, watching debris crumble from the ceiling. There was only one requirement. The monster had to be defeated before it could destroy the altar and break free. Clenching his teeth, the protagonist drove his sword deep into the fallen beast's chest. No one else would dare attempt this challenge. At the end of the room, a golden portal shimmered into existence. As Hansu stepped inside, the system confirmed the hidden task was complete. The boy reached out, his bloody fingers closing around the glowing treasure. A faint smile crossed his lips as he examined what lay in his grasp. The ring of the Vampire King, Nirmaha. As he looked closer, a realization struck him. He now understood how the Berserker King had obtained it and why no one else had ever managed to claim it. A brilliant white gemstone shimmered on the ring's surface, its radiance undeniable. Beyond it, space was littered with floating artifacts, each classified by color, an essential indicator of their value. In general, ordinary artifacts could never surpass superior-colored ones. But there were always exceptions. Multicolored runes flickered in the air. Over time, as travelers evolved their runes, certain artifacts could absorb them, changing their color in the process. The most coveted among all were single artifacts. A sudden flash erupted from the pedestal, followed by a burst of flame igniting in the boy's palm. Number 9. The Nirmaha Ring. A symbol of Clementine himself. The Berserker King had once concealed his face behind his hand, the weight of his power evident. Single artifacts were not named for their rarity but for their exclusivity. Each one had only one rightful owner. The Nirmaha Ring had become synonymous with Clementine because, under his control, countless foes had been torn apart by its power. Holding the ring, the reincarnator could hardly believe such a legendary artifact was now his. Slipping it onto his finger, he knew this was not some forgotten relic left to chance. The difficulty of obtaining it proved its significance. He clenched his fist, and the system immediately responded. System notification. The user can wield only one ability at a time. Total abilities, 8. Currently, the ring is colorless, only one ability can be activated. A sudden surge of energy burst forth. Power of Destruction. This ability disabled an opponent's skills and traits, even passive ones. A red warning message flickered in the air, indicating the effect's time limit. But that didn't matter. The mere ability to nullify an enemy's power at will gave him an undeniable advantage. A status window appeared, detailing the ring's conditions. To unlock its full potential, at least one of his attributes needed to match the colorless rune. Stroking his chin, the protagonist recognized the challenge ahead. He would need a vast number of magic runes. That, however, was a problem for later. Hansa stepped through the golden portal, emerging onto the street. Ahead, she spotted him, her eyes widening in delight. "Did you really kill the carnivorous beast?" she asked, running up to meet him. But before he could answer, a low, guttural roar echoed through the air. The girl's expression shifted to horror as a massive shadow loomed over her. The timer had expired. The altar that once stood before them had vanished. Hansa simply looked at her, his voice calm. "I thought I told you about this." A smile played on his lips as he reminded her. "I promised I'd take responsibility for destroying it." A faint blush dusted her cheeks before she quickly turned away, flustered. Sangjin looked up at the sky, reassured that he had been right to trust his decision. Then, glancing down, he said, "We still have some time before the next training begins." Turning toward the gathered survivors, he made his next move. "Let's go hunting," he told her. She hesitated, lowering her gaze. "I was thinking of going a different way," she admitted. The protagonist glanced back in surprise but didn't lift her gaze to him. The woman spoke calmly, saying she was not good enough to stay by his side forever. Eventually, she would have to rely only on herself. Closing her eyes, she added that the boy had suggested they go together. Looking over at his team, the survivor confirmed that she could join them. Everyone would welcome her. Hansa turned to his friend, realizing this was the right moment for them to part ways, no matter how difficult it was. With the second training about to begin, they would have been separated anyway. Accepting this, he raised his eyebrows and called it a good decision. The girl watched him in silence as he walked away. Taking a step forward, she suddenly called out for him to stop. Her brows furrowed with determination as she made a promise, not to give up when they met again. Smiling, he agreed, suggesting they meet once more. A faint smile crossed the boy's face before he turned away from his friends. Just as he was about to leave, Sangjin flinched at the sound of his name. Without looking back, the reincarnator reminded him of his offer, making it clear that the choice was his. The boy's face lit up with a smile, his cheeks slightly flushed. A week later, the fairy spread her arms wide before the gathered travelers, announcing that they had waited long enough. The second training was finally about to begin. The devil covered his mouth with a hand and cleared his throat, scanning the participants. The assistant noted that there were more people than expected. With a mischievous grin, the monster declared he had been looking forward to this moment for a long time. The protagonist kept her eyes on him. Then, with a snap of her fingers, the fairy changed the scene. A sudden burst of bright light erupted from the ground. Sangjin looked down in alarm, his voice shaking as he asked what was happening. A girl clung to her father's hand. Hansu, gazing upward, understood. It had begun. The man touched the ground and found himself materializing in an empty room. People around him murmured in confusion, wondering where they were. A schoolgirl began crying from the tension. Meanwhile, the system's voice echoed through the space, confirming everything was in place and suggesting a recalculation before the training could proceed. A brunette raised an eyebrow in surprise, asking what that meant. Several men clenched their teeth in frustration. The voice calmly explained that moving forward, each room could only hold 7 people at most. The training would resume once this rule was followed. A group of people gathered in a circle. Adjusting his glasses, a man realized with a grimace. They had 8 members. The voice clarified that while each team's situation would be different, everyone had to start under the same conditions, meaning they were free to discuss and decide among themselves. Crossing his arms, the brunette remained unfazed. Lately, things had been too easy anyway. His gaze drifted to a strange needle-like weapon hanging from a competitor's belt. The guy stood confidently in the center of the survivors. Though the traveler had never seen him fight firsthand, he had heard rumors. This person was a valuable ally. Raising her hand, a stranger spoke up. No matter what, they had to work together. However, they couldn't ignore the reality. One of them had to leave. Closing her eyes for a moment, she suggested they introduce themselves, emphasizing that first impressions mattered. Stretching out her arms, she added that their introduction would prove their worth. Taking the first step forward, a man with a fiery blade in hand spoke. He introduced himself as Daichiol and confidently stated that no one in the room had a skill strong enough to defeat him, making him the most valuable asset. A sharply dressed man lifted an eyebrow in concern. Narrowing his eyes, another young man quickly recognized the name of the skill Daichiol was referring to. QI Art. A red aura flickered around the blade in Daichiol's grip. QI Art was a runic ability that used magic to enhance a wielder's stats and weapons. It was unique and powerful but not particularly suited for their current environment. Unshaken, Daichiol tightened his grip on his blade, a faint glow illuminating his fist. Kamenet introduced himself as a healer, stating that if they were discussing essential skills, his abilities were just as crucial. Unimpressed, Hanchiol crossed his arms, declared that he had a combat skill specializing in horror. The man in the suit hesitated before asking if they truly had to eliminate someone, pleading for an exception since his family members were present in the room. Before anyone could respond, the warrior raised his hand. Daichiol's gaze shifted to another person who had yet to introduce themselves. He suggested that she set an example for the others. Narrowing her eyes, the stranger closed them briefly before introducing herself as Jimin. A wild grin spread across her face. Without hesitation, she decided to demonstrate her ability. Gritting his teeth, a man nearby instinctively stepped back and asked if she really needed to approach him. He warned that her actions would not be well received. Ignoring him, a purple energy surged around Jimin as she moved closer. In an instant, blood splattered. The tip of her blade had found its mark. The warrior gasped as the knife pierced his chest from behind. Hanchiol's mouth fell open in shock. The man in the suit immediately shielded his family. The blonde warrior crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Jimin, still smiling, picked up a red stone from his body. She explained that the chances of obtaining such a rune were incredibly low. Holding it up, she gestured to the other runes and suggested they divide them among themselves. They needed to be extremely cautious around someone who could kill so effortlessly. Meanwhile, the protagonist crossed his arms, looking off to the side. This woman had just made things easier for those without skills. A mother held her frightened daughter close. In their past lives, they had died here. But now, the future had shifted. Hansu, smirking, found himself intrigued. Events were only becoming more interesting. Just then, the fairy peeked out from a rift, announcing that they were the first group to reach the required 7 members. She then proceeded to explain the next phase of their journey. The heroes found themselves on a floating island. A chain of islands, connected by suspension bridges, formed a path leading upward. Their mission was clear. Over the next 3 months, they had to ascend to the dormant volcano at the center of the 2nd floor. That was their first goal. Pointing upward, the devil declared that once they completed this stage, a world of adventure would open before them. The assistant wished them luck. The group tensed as they looked ahead. Without hesitation, they stepped onto the suspension bridge. Han Chiol, smiling, remarked that since they would be together for a while, they might as well become friends. Then, frowning, he asked where their ally was rushing off to. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened in horror. He shouted for everyone to stop. The bridge behind them began to collapse. Realizing the danger, the team bolted forward, barely avoiding the fall into the abyss. One of them glanced back, watching as the rest of the squad caught up. Overhead, the fairy appeared again, warning them that as time passed, sections of the lower islands would break away, causing the bridges to fall even faster. Gritting his teeth, a man muttered in frustration. Couldn't they have been warned about this sooner? Shaking off his irritation, he got back on his feet and asked again where their ally was heading. Frowning, the soldier accused him of being antisocial. Jimin, still smiling, suggested they follow him. His confident stride made it seem like he knew exactly where to go. The reincarnator fixed his gaze ahead as the survivors continued along a forest path. The bright sun shone down on them as they pressed forward. Han Chiol sighed, complaining that they had been wandering for hours without spotting a single bridge leading upward. He started to doubt whether their comrade even knew the right path. A girl casually waved away a fly and admitted she had no idea. Han Chiol frowned, convinced they had passed this area before. There was nothing here. Noticing their leader chewing on something, the soldier asked what he had been eating all this time. The protagonist held up a piece of oak bark, explaining that it acted as an antidote for Fawn. Han Chiol raised an eyebrow. Why would you need an antidote now? Before he could answer, a massive snake slithered along a tree branch, its tail suddenly dropping down. At that moment, Hansa grabbed his ally by the collar and yanked him back just as the serpent lunged forward, mouth wide open. Squinting, Hansa smirked. Found it. The team managed to dodge in time. Looking up at him, one of them asked how he had known the beast would attack. Still chewing on the bark, the young man shrugged. Superpowers. The soldier raised his eyebrows in confusion. What is that supposed to mean? Before he could finish, the snake sank its fangs into his hand. With a grunt, he shook it off and hurled it away. A knife embedded itself into the reptile's neck, causing it to thrash violently. The rune snake's mouth gaped open. The system's voice echoed, explaining that the nature of these creatures depended on the ever-changing patterns on their heads. Glancing at his bite wound, Han Chiol realized that the enemies weren't giving them a moment to recover. If this kept up, his body would not last. His gaze shifted to a couple with their child. Frustrated, he asked why they weren't fighting and told them to stop hiding behind others and join in. Tension flickered in the man's expression as he adjusted his suit. I have people to protect. I can't risk my life for strangers. The soldier clenched his fists. That shouldn't matter. We're all just trying to survive. He turned toward his comrade standing by a tree and scowled. And what about you? You don't have families. So what's stopping you? K-Minute adjusted his glasses, his voice calm. If something happens to me in battle, how do you plan to heal without my help? Han Chiol scoffed. You think I carry this sword for decoration? Raising a single finger, the healer stated his price. 3 power runes or 1 magic rune per treatment. Han Chiol's eyes widened in shock. That's insane. Jimin, unimpressed, turned toward the group. Are we really just going to stand here arguing about payment while others are fighting? The soldier gritted his teeth. Was he the only one who thought this whole situation was a mess? The man with glasses raised his hand impatiently. Less talking, more moving. Han Chiol narrowed his eyes. Getting cocky just because you can heal? Huh. Before he could respond, a voice called out to them. How do you like the place? The soldier glanced down and sighed. Better not talk about it. Then, he asked, how's it going on your side? An icon of 2 machine guns flashed in the air. A voice responded, not too bad. We've got a rescuer up here. Another voice chimed in. Keep an eye out for useful recruits on your way. We need to expand our ranks. Han Chiol scratched his head in frustration, unsure of what to do. He wanted to go forward, but bringing along a man who claimed to have superpowers felt like a risky choice. Ahead of them, Jimin raised her sword, holding it steady. The cunning doctor averted his gaze, while a woman gently stroked her daughter's head. A man nervously scratched his neck as a voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that survival was the only thing that mattered. It promised they would meet again. Han Chiol turned back, noticing the symbol on his ally's hand. He thought about how little time had passed, too little for a monarch's traits to fully awaken. A golden crown shimmered in the air. Monarchs, like the king of the berserkers, all had distinct personalities that made them natural leaders. A girl stood before a crowd, raising a flag. Monarchs granted their clans a unique symbol. Some received rings, others magical marks. Those who bore these symbols shared a deep connection, allowing them to communicate telepathically. A sword plunged into a snake's body. There was a limit to how many people a monarch could mark, which was why they carefully sought out the most worthy individuals. Picking up a rune from the ground, the young man resolved to grow stronger. If he ever had to compete with them, he would need to be prepared. Looking to the side, the reincarnator realized that a leader needed power. Only then would people follow. The ground was littered with the corpses of snakes. Taking a step forward, a squad member hesitated. Had they truly left the monster's territory? It didn't seem like it. If anything, their numbers had only dwindled. Pushing aside a bush, the protagonist's eyes narrowed. Ahead, the mutated snake's lair awaited. In a small clearing, a fallen tree lay in the distance. His goal was close. Wrapped around the tree was a massive runic snake, its face marked with a strange symbol. Just as he took a step, a man in a suit raised a hand, urging him to stop. "Do we really need to fight that thing?" he asked. "We could just slip past without being noticed." Lifting an eyebrow, the young man responded coolly. "I'll handle this alone. If you want to move ahead, go on without me." His ally turned away in frustration. "That's not what I meant," he said. "Why would you do something so reckless? We're supposed to move together." The reincarnator's gaze darkened. "I never planned on going with you in the first place," he stated. Moving through the bushes, he added, "You were just heading in the same direction as me. Now it's time to go our separate ways." Jimin closed her eyes. There was no point in arguing. The suited man's eyes widened in shock. Han Chiol watched his ally closely, his hand resting on his chin. He couldn't just leave him behind like this. Clenching his jaw, he considered dragging the boy along by force. "Why?" he asked. The doctor scoffed, his lips curling in disdain. "Because," he said, "he's the only one who never once asked me for healing. People like him, those who are used to the battlefield, don't listen to anyone." Kang Minute turned away, his tone indifferent. "People like him don't last long," he added. Han Chiol glanced back, frustrated. Losing someone that talented was a shame, but controlling him would have been just as difficult. Meanwhile, the devourer snake sank its fangs into a tree trunk, its jaws stretching wide. The beast moved cautiously, avoiding its enemy whenever a certain magic rune was active, yet attacking when others were in effect. The only exception was agility. When that rune activated, the symbol on its forehead shifted. Seizing his chance, the protagonist struck several times with his sword. Standing before the bloodthirsty creature, Hansen noted that while this snake was faster and stronger than ordinary reptiles, it was still no match for a true carnivorous beast. As it retaliated, its resistance rune activated, dampening the damage. Lighting a cigarette, the boy exhaled slowly. A drawn-out fight would not put him at a disadvantage, but it would cause unnecessary trouble. The rune snake bared its teeth. The key to victory was clear. Instead of focusing on the monster, he needed to target the trees in the center of the clearing, its lair. Without hesitation, he dashed forward. The moment he attacked the lair, instinct would drive the snake to defend it, leaving itself open. As predicted, the beast abandoned its defense, lunging after him. Han Chiol stopped abruptly. A flurry of blows struck the giant reptile. Moments later, he turned away smugly as the massive corpse slumped to the ground behind him. It ended faster than he expected. Among the fallen leaves, an egg lay trembling, the egg of the rune-eater snake. He picked it up, pressing a rune to the shell. Cracks formed. A tiny eye peeked through before a newborn snake emerged, its small body nothing compared to its adult kin. But this one was different. Its eyes shimmered as runes fluttered around it. The little creature swallowed a rune, then immediately spat it out. That was its ability. After consuming any 3 runes, it could spit out 2 of the owner's choice. Some might call it wasteful, trading 3 for 2. But Han Chiol didn't hesitate. Carefully stroking his new companion, he decided that obtaining the right runes was far more important than hoarding them. Strengthening his magical and physical resistance came first. Looking down at the tiny beast, he gave it a simple command: rest. He had a goal to achieve, and with this creature's help, he'd get there. It was time to move forward. "Nearby," a girl asked. "Where do we go from here?" A man holding a map replied, "Be patient." The maps they had received after leaving the room weren't detailed. Staring at the paper, the suited man frowned. "We can't just wander forward without knowing what's ahead, or where we'll find a safe zone." If they hadn't been abandoned, things would have been different. A sudden rustling from the bushes made a woman tense. Covering his family protectively, a survivor stiffened. Was it a monster? Or another traveler? Then, from the bushes, the protagonist emerged. The group's tension eased immediately, their faces lighting up with relief. Walking up to them, "What are you all doing here?" A man grinned. "You made it out. Did you escape from that monster?" Scratching the back of his head, "Caught it." The man in the suit stared in disbelief. His friend had survived with just a single scratch? Impossible. Meanwhile, the survivor hesitated when asked about the others. A while ago, Caminit had simply crossed his arms and urged the family to leave. The man furrowed his brows. What are you talking about? He asked, concern creeping into his voice. Splitting up was too dangerous. And besides, there was no reason to do so. Han Chiol smirked. So, are you planning to just hide behind us and travel comfortably? Jimin glanced back and nodded in agreement. Without a strong fighter in the group, being stuck with annoying companions would only make things worse. The healer shrugged. I don't really care who gives me runes, but I'd rather stick with the strong ones. The suited man's expression darkened. We were left behind. The rest of the squad even blocked the path to stop us from following them. Noticing their comrade turning away, the survivor hesitated. Where are you going? The boy didn't stop. We've wasted enough time. Let's go. The woman frowned, then signaled for her husband to follow. He hesitated but finally raised a hand, gesturing for his family to move. As they trailed behind, the reincarnator glanced back. What are you trying to do? The suited man raised his eyebrows, recalling his own words. With a sigh, he said, forget it. You go ahead. We'll handle things our way. Closing his eyes, the protagonist shrugged. Do whatever you want. Does not matter. I'll be fighting alone anyway. Hansa battled several boars. The fights weren't easy, but each one strengthened his stats, keeping him in top form. Releasing the Rooney to snake onto the grass, he watched as it devoured a rune. Strengthening his resistance first had been a smart choice. Taking another stone in his hand, he thought, this should make things easier. From the bushes, his family observed him quietly. He realized they needed food. The girl blushed slightly, embarrassed at how much stronger he had become. The woman, on the other hand, was simply relieved. At least he didn't seem to care about them. The schoolgirl hesitated. Should we fight too? Her father shook his head. That would be foolish and reckless. Staying safe is what matters. The fact that we're still together, that's already a blessing. Ahead, the reincarnator ran forward, and the others hurried after him. Where are you heading now? Stopped in front of a dark tunnel. Sunlight streamed down, casting a glow on his face. The survivor shielded his eyes from the brightness, squinting at the sight ahead. There were more people. Many more. The man stared. Wait, have they been heading here this whole time? Behind him, the family broke into smiles, relief washing over them. They had survived. Han Chiol turned around, and Hansu's expression darkened the moment he saw him. The soldier immediately understood. Judging by his condition, the rumors were true. He really had taken down a carnivorous beast on his own. Meanwhile, the fairy leaned on her hand, clearly annoyed by the commotion from the latecomers. Deciding she'd had enough, she slammed the door behind them. With that, the tunnel was sealed off by a massive stone, cutting off any way back. Not far away, the devil snapped his fingers, proposing another large-scale event. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and the survivors found themselves on the shore of a mountain lake. At the first-floor dock, the assistant welcomed them, relieved that about 75 people had made it this far. Then, a monstrous figure appeared, announcing the next event, a battle for tickets. Blue tickets materialized in front of the travelers. These were their only means of escaping the collapsing island and reaching the next one. The fairy spread her arms, explaining the situation. Some islands were overrun with monsters and surrounded by lava, while others, the central and southern islands, held valuable treasures. However, getting there would not be easy. Rules were in place to make things interesting. In the lake, several boats were available, each capable of carrying 3 people. To travel, a group needed at least 3 tickets. However, if 3 people used 3 tickets, they would each end up on separate islands. A diagram displayed the distribution pattern. Some boats would reach the outskirts, while others could land in the central zones. One particular island was marked with a question mark, hinting at an unknown fate. On the other hand, if 2 people used 3 tickets, they would arrive on the same island but would not be able to choose where. Han Chiol and Jimin listened carefully as the devil explained one final rule. A single person could go anywhere if they had 3 tickets. The revelation left the family stunned. The assistant peered through his telescope, scanning the islands. He warned that they would begin collapsing from the outer edges inward, and the difficulty of survival varied greatly depending on where they landed. The more advantages they secured now, the better their chances later. The countdown had begun. Only 30 minutes remained before the starting island crumbled. 25 boats were scattered across the crater. The fairy grinned mischievously, reminding everyone of one simple truth. Survival was the only thing that mattered. And the more chaos, the more entertaining it would be. As expected, panic broke out. People started attacking each other, desperate to snatch tickets for themselves. A young man frowned, realizing there was no stopping the inevitable. Before he could act, someone called his name. Nearby, a man in a suit knelt on the ground, his head bowed. He pleaded with his ally, asking him to help his family, just this once. Without lifting his head, the survivor explained that they needed more tickets to safely reach the central island. But his so-called ally only smiled, eyes gleaming with madness. Aren't you strong? He asked mockingly. Shouldn't it be easy for you to get those tickets? Lifting his head, The desperate man insisted that if his ally took a few extra tickets and handed them over, they could all reach their destination safely. Then, pressing his forehead to the ground, he begged him to spare the innocent. The reincarnator averted his gaze, unimpressed. "It's time you took responsibility for yourselves," he said coldly. "Mind your own business," the survivor scoffed, asking if his so-called ally had no sympathy at all. Before he could say more, Han Shiol stepped forward and told him to be quiet. The soldier didn't hesitate. He kicked the traveler aside, then grabbed him by the collar. "Are you really going to waste time listening to this annoying fool?" he sneered. "I just want to grab my tickets and go." Turning to the protagonist, the soldier made an offer. He'd travel with them and even hand over his tickets if necessary. Glancing back at the group, he admitted he didn't like any of them, even though they were supposedly on the same side. Han Shiol clenched his fist. "If you're so strong, why not team up with someone on your level?" In response, the soldier raised his hand, revealing a glowing symbol. He explained that this was not just a skill, it was a power awakened by a friend, meaning the boy could gain it too. Hansa stared silently at the mark as the man continued, saying their leader had already agreed to give it to him. Traveling alone was more hassle than it was worth. But Hansu only shook his head. "I'm not interested." The survivor's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Do you even understand what you're turning down?" The man tried to convince him, insisting that he didn't realize the true value of the clan. But Hansu turned away, his mind drifting to the faces of his comrades. Walking through the forest, he remembered the bond they shared. He couldn't just throw that away. Looking ahead with newfound determination, he made his choice. He would follow the monarch. It was the only way to achieve his goal. Realizing that Hansu was not going to change his mind, Cho let out a smirk. "So that's how it is." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed his ticket at Hansu's feet. "I stole this from that worthless man," he explained, gesturing toward the fallen survivor. "Take it or don't, I don't care. But consider this a gift for the future. We'll be seeing each other again." The soldier scowled at his comrade's refusal. "I don't have time for this." Without another word, he turned and walked away. Hansu eyed the ticket on the ground, unmoved. These tricks would not work on him. None of this mattered right now. But the moment the other travelers spotted the ticket, everything spiraled into chaos. A mob rushed forward, desperate to claim it. Someone managed to grab it first, but the struggle was not over. Hansa stood to the side, watching silently as the survivors fought over their chance to escape. Then, a flash of silver, a knife. Kian lunged at a man to protect her father, but the attacker grabbed her by the vest, smirking as he realized they were from the same family. "Perfect," he said coldly. "Then you can die together." From a distance, the fairy observed the scene with amusement. The parents wailed for their daughter, their pain woven into the very design of this twisted game. It was deliberate, a cruel spectacle orchestrated by the higher powers. This stage was nothing more than a battlefield of puppets, and the devil was pulling every string. Even death itself was just another part of the show. The young man flinched as a voice broke through the chaos, questioning why he had turned down Han Shiol's offer. Jimin crossed her arms, watching him closely. The reincarnator remained unfazed. "Personal reasons," he replied. "What do you want?" Smiling, Jimin stepped forward. "I have an offer of my own." She removed her glove and extended a hand, inviting him to join her. But once again, the protagonist shook his head. Jimin sighed, as if she had expected that answer. Before turning away, she decided to ask him one last question. "Are you really staying behind because of some clumsy sense of sympathy?" Her gaze sharpened. "You're not that pathetic." Hansa smirked at her words but said nothing. She was the last one left. Everyone else who had the chance to leave had already taken it. The boats lifted into the sky, and now, only one remained in the crater. No matter what happened here, no one would ever know. Bodies littered the ground, some wounded, many dead. Those who remained barely had the strength to defend themselves. Shadows loomed behind the boy, voices trembling as they pleaded for salvation. He wanted to help them all, but he knew it was impossible. Here, in the training area, the fairy's power was absolute. Above them, the devil circled lazily, watching the unfolding scene. Turning away from the desperate faces, the boy steeled himself. He had no choice. If he failed here, everything would have been for nothing. Gripping his sword, his hand trembled. "Forgive me," he whispered. He already knew the fate of those left behind. The remaining travelers plunged into the river of acid, their screams piercing the air as they begged for help. The fairy, perched above, watched with delight as their bodies dissolved. Hansa spread his arms. "Complain all you want," he said, his blue eyes glowing. Instead of leaving them to suffer for his assistant's amusement, he had shown them a different kind of mercy. Above him, islands hovered in the sky. A snake coiled on his shoulder, devouring runes as it watched. "Fascinating," the boy murmured. But the moment was fleeting. It was over too soon. Crossing his arms, the assistant nodded approvingly. "As expected from a rising star," he remarked. "We never just talk for fun." Grinning, the devil hovered nearby. "I'll be looking forward to our next meeting." Hansa glanced downward, his expression unreadable. He had no regrets. He hadn't come back to save everyone. He had come to win. Hesitation had no place in this world. Looking toward the sky, he refocused on his next goal. The central island. The last boat drifted into the air, carrying him forward. In the heart of the island stood a towering clock tower. The system announced its congratulations to the nearly 1921 travelers who had made it this far, welcoming them to the land of opportunity. Above the grand castle with its striking red roofs, a clear blue sky stretched endlessly. On this central island, three things were crucial: protecting the crystal housed within the castle, growing stronger through the region's unique dungeon, and preparing for the incoming wave of monsters. The enormous pink crystal gleamed under the sunlight, while the castle's wooden doors stood slightly ajar, allowing beams of light to spill into the hall. Beyond those doors, an army of skeletons, their eyes glowing eerily beneath protective armor, advanced. The hero issued an order to stop them. From atop the castle walls, defenders fired arrows and swung swords, trying to hold their ground. A boy shouted in panic. They were running out of men. The hero's grip on his sword tightened as he blocked a skeleton's strike. But in the chaos, a skeleton's blade sliced through a girl's neck. The hero let out a desperate cry, declaring that if they could endure just a little longer, they might survive another day. One of the fighters, his eyes dark with exhaustion, stretched his hand forward. He shouted that lasting another month was impossible. They needed reinforcements. The hero barked another command, ordering everyone to maintain formation. Suddenly, bright energy crackled in the air, lifting small debris from the ground. A piercing scream echoed across the battlefield. Inside the castle, a boy slammed his palm on an ornate table, insisting that rules needed to be established. The hero rose to his feet, frustration evident in his voice. Their defenses had collapsed on the very first day, and the damage was severe. How much longer could they afford to wait? Jungwook frowned, warning that if things continued like this, they wouldn't just fail to protect the crystal. They'd all be slaughtered. And Juyun clasped her hands together, suggesting they wait for the other monarchs before making a decision. Xia, unimpressed, crossed her arms. The strongest are already here, she said. The rest don't matter. Li Guktai raised an eyebrow. So, what's your plan? Jungwook spread his arms. The biggest issue is the lack of protectors. If we want to survive, we need more people, even if it means bringing in those who haven't joined the clans, by force if necessary. Xia's eyes narrowed. And how exactly do you plan to control these unaligned travelers? The man frowned, his expression grim. We'll have to put pressure on them, he said. But I doubt words will do much in this lawless mess. Leaning both hands on the table, he reminded them that the next attack was coming in just 3 hours. And this time, survival wasn't guaranteed. The hero's voice cut through the tense silence. Are we just going to sit back and let it happen? Li Guktai raised an eyebrow. And what if the clan alliance joins forces with us? Can you guarantee that we'll make a difference? The hero exhaled sharply. Sending more people into the dungeon is a serious decision. From the window, the gathered heroes could be seen seated around the table. A voice noted that with their growing numbers, they now matched the clan alliance. A new faction had formed, a ragtag group calling themselves the Basement Alliance. They were unpredictable, operating outside anyone's control. The real question was whether the clan alliance, which had focused solely on defense until now, could actually handle them. A vision formed in his mind. Rows of people standing before a wooden gate. Jungwook turned away, visibly displeased. Send the clans from the front lines into the dungeon, he suggested. And Juyun immediately shot up. Then who's going to defend the castle? A girl spoke next. If we're doing that, then the smaller clans should go first to minimize losses. Xia closed her eyes, frustration creeping in. This discussion was going in circles. Everyone was just voicing their wishes without any real plan. Biting her finger, she looked away, lost in thought. If only all 1,900 people focused on defense. At first, survival had been a shared goal. But that changed when someone returned from the dungeon wielding powerful artifacts. One by one, the clans abandoned their posts, seeking strength instead. Near a large sword, a group of battered and bruised warriors stood. A girl clutched a precious stone, while a boy gripped a golden necklace. Xia absently bit her nail. How are we supposed to protect the crystal for an entire month? Just then, the door swung open. A girl entered the room. Xia tensed, grinding her teeth as she raised a hand. I don't have time for your games. Jimin smirked. Not here to mess around. I got news. Xia narrowed her eyes. This better be good. Jimin's voice was urgent. Some lunatic is fighting the Basement Alliance right now. Xia's eyes widened. What? How is that even possible? A distant voice yelled for help, his words frantic. I never promised I wouldn't go. The heroes turned in surprise. A young man collapsed to all fours, panting as he lifted his head. I'll hunt for 2 more days, he muttered, struggling to his feet. Then I'll come back. I will join you. But first, I need to get stronger. Around him, the others froze. Their eyes locked on the shimmering energy trailing through the air. A sudden impact. The guy staggered backward, gasping. His shoulder burned where he'd been struck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. From across the room, a hero exhaled a thin stream of smoke, cigarette in hand. You're done. Starting tomorrow, everyone fights upstairs. No more sitting around. The young man instinctively stepped forward. The hero raised a hand. Don't come any closer. But the dark-haired boy took another step. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. The hero's raw strength, his art characteristics, were lower than his own. And yet, there was no way he could beat him. His fingers twitched as he stretched out a hand. I need my weapon. A ripple of unease spread through the onlookers. Someone frowned. Who does this guy think he is? The hero answered with action. A flash of silver. His knife cut through the air, glowing with streams of energy. He lunged straight at the young man, his blade deadly. The boy spun, his thoughts racing. That knife, it has a skill that enhances its cutting power. He opened his palm. The dark-haired guy extended his palm, analyzing the blade in front of him. Not bad for a colorless rank artifact. Without warning, he lunged forward, gripping the hero by the throat. The surrounding crowd erupted into shouts, urging him to finish the hero off. But he frowned, teeth clenched. The knife skill hadn't activated. The blade hadn't pierced him. Does he have some kind of defense? The dark-haired hero smirked. Is it my turn now? A sharp impact. His fist slammed into the guy's face, leaving bruises and scrapes. Fighting without killing them was exhausting, but he had no choice. These people were valuable resources. The guy crashed to the ground, his vision blurring. Around him, the onlookers stared in shock. He sighed, realizing there was no point in talking. They wouldn't listen to reason. The dark-haired hero raised an eyebrow, then smirked. Guess I've got one last cigarette left. That should be enough. Meanwhile, Jungwook and Shia stepped outside, only to freeze in place, their expressions shifting in surprise. Who is that guy? A voice muttered. Inside, an unknown figure sat at the table, facing the other monarchs. Shia and Injuyun exchanged wary glances. The hero furrowed his brows. So this is the guy Han Shiol mentioned. But what was that magical beast on his shoulder? The dark-haired stranger crossed his arms. Starting tomorrow, the Basement Alliance and the Clan Alliance will merge. We'll alternate between defense and hunting. If anyone has a problem with that, speak now. Hansa scanned the room, his gaze settling on the assembled leaders. You can't expect people to follow orders without being part of the system. We need to bring in as many capable individuals as possible. If they refuse, we'll make them join. Outside forces will follow our commands, no exceptions. Shia's eyes widened. This benefits us more than it does him. What's he really after? Lee Guktai raised an eyebrow. And what do you want out of this? The guy smirked. Funny, a man with this much power stirs up chaos, yet claims he has no personal motives. The protagonist exhaled, his expression unreadable. As long as the basic rules and systems are in place, I have no reason to interfere. Lee Guktai narrowed his eyes. You say that. But what happens if you change your mind? What if one day you decide to take out the Alliance? Hansa stood abruptly. I don't have time for pointless arguments. His lips curled into a grin. But since you're all so paranoid, his body shimmered. Then, in an instant, he vanished. Jungwook stiffened. He's gone. The heroes instinctively reached for their weapons. Shia's voice cut through the room. Stay alert. He's probably planning an attack. Lee Guktai scowled, drawing his sword. It's just a basic invisibility skill. He can't have gone far. A sharp presence. Hansa reappeared behind him, pressing a blade against the boy's throat. His voice was calm, but laced with amusement. Did you really think I couldn't attack if I wanted to? Lee Guktai's eyes widened in disbelief. Was this really just a trick? Or had the boy actually summoned a dragon strong enough to shatter his senses? He couldn't wrap his head around how easily he'd been deceived. Meanwhile, the protagonist recalled something he had gained just before arriving here. Since the pattern had continued so far, he saw no reason to break it now. Lee Guktai dropped to his knees, his hands braced against the floor. Hansa closed his eyes and told everyone to calm down. He had no ill intentions. Now was the time for unity. Each of them had a role to play, and if they focused on their part, they could make this work. That was the plan. Lee Guktai slowly rose, pressing a hand to his throat as if still processing what had happened. Hansa walked down the castle corridor, lost in thought. They had been at odds for so long that forming an alliance wouldn't be easy. But there was still time. He wouldn't force it. This was just the beginning. There were bigger matters to handle later. Just then, Jimin appeared in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. She told him to wait. She didn't like being ignored. Hansa frowned. Jimin raised an eyebrow, reminding him of their previous conversation. This time, she expected a different answer. Soft particles of light flickered in the air between them. She had asked before if he wanted to join their alliance, but now, she was extending a real invitation. Stepping closer, she placed a hand on his shoulder. What do you think? She asked. Traveling alone must be lonely. Or, do you already have someone? Hansa's expression darkened, and he turned away without answering. Jimin studied him carefully. I heard you were with a girl named Mi at Gangnam Station, she said, watching him closely. His reaction told her everything she needed to know. With a small smile, she brushed past him. Well, It doesn't really matter, but it'd be nice if you joined our clan. Hansa froze, weighing his options. Jimin turned back, raising an eyebrow. You're not even going to pretend to listen, she scoffed. Then, with a smirk, she called him an annoying bastard and walked away. From a castle window, Hansa could be seen sighing. Outside, on the crumbling castle walls, injured fighters sat scattered across the battlefield. A commanding voice ordered the bodies to be gathered. There were still vital supplies they needed. Those with support abilities were told to step aside. Hansa raised an eyebrow as he turned to the sergeant. The southern wall is holding up, more or less. The man nodded. Good. I've ordered the wounded to be taken below. The rest can get some rest. Then, looking at Hansu, he asked, how's your clan holding up? Hansu exhaled. This time, we managed to put up a proper defense. Every post is secure.